Home Sweet Home 01. Humble beginnings and stark realizations. Look at him, he's so cute. How could anyone willingly give him away? A voice called from somewhere in a room filled with blinding sunlight. Opening his eyes with a slow wince, he held his hands in front of his face, trying his best to clear his vision from the strange blurriness he was experiencing. Who would even name their child Tom, Dick, Harry? Did they think his life was some sort of joke? The too loud voice continued with a sour note, a pair of massive hands reaching down to pick him up from where he lay on the bed beneath him. Soon, his eyes fully opened, and he saw the most gigantic woman he had ever seen in his life, holding him close to her chest like he was some sort of child. He grasped the hem of her shirt, afraid that she might drop him by mistake even as she turned to walk back into the house, her body going mostly slack for some strange reason. "Ah, yeah, I understand. I'll take him in," she said to someone, as if she had been reacting to an order from a superior talking aloud. The woman adjusted him lightly, allowing him to look over her shoulder by accident, and what he saw was horrifying. A woman in all black robes with a tall, pointed witch's hat was giving them the most stern, no-nonsense look he had ever seen on a woman, and holding a rather strange-looking pointy stick, its tip glowing with a strange essence he had never seen before. Tom, as he supposed his name was now, wasn't too worried, however. The woman holding him was gentle and seemed to like him a little already. The inside of the house was warm and cosy, and looking at it one way, it was like a fresh start on life. The matron, as he assumed she was, put him down into a crib inside the room again as the witch left, allowing the two of them to sit in the room together on their own. It took a few minutes before the woman nodded to herself and tucked him in, cooing to him with gentle tones as she smiled and turned on a small, vintage television for the sake of having a children's cartoon play for him. "Don't worry, little one. You'll grow up strong and smart and receive plenty of love," she told him, before making her way towards the door to the room, muttering about making something for the children to snack on. Once he was left alone in the room, he sighed to himself, taking in the feel of the warm, fluffy blankets and the sounds and sights of the crackling fireplace nearby. He decided that this wouldn't be a bad place to restart his life. It wasn't like he had much left going for him in his old life, considering he was already retired. His grandchildren had already forgotten about him in the care home they had left him in, while his children squabbled constantly over who was going to get his inheritance. Like he wasn't still very much alive at the time, it was quite annoying if he had to put an emotion to it. Well, they would certainly be in for a shock when they found out that he had left it all to his younger brother's children instead of his own. One of them had managed to get a job as a banker, and was willing to invest it for his siblings and cousins, so maybe something good would come of it in the end. He knew that he might have some trouble getting to the level of wealth and comfort in his last life, as it seemed like he was an orphan in the Harry Potter universe. But he was fairly certain that he probably had some form of magic if a witch was dropping him off at an orphanage, and that should make up for any lacking monetary means rather quickly, as long as he studied hard enough, and wasn't literally in Britain during the time Voldemort was still alive and kicking. The TV swapped to the local news broadcast when one of the older kids walked into the room, as if by itself for some reason. With a sigh, the young boy grumbled about it under his breath, and made his way over to press the buttons and try to get it back on the correct channel again. "Stupid TV, why do you always switch channels whenever I enter the room and no one else?" he murmured in what sounded like a stereotypical London accent, as if straight from one of the movies. While he worked on fixing it, Tom caught a glance at the screen. A news clip was playing, stating that it was January 1st of the year 1975. Apparently, some people had gone missing and or died as a result of gas leaks. Why gas leaks? That sounded somewhat ridiculous considering some people had somehow vanished. That got his still tiny mind to think as hard as it could. If it was Harry Potter, there was no way in hell that that was a gas leak. Never mind that he apparently was in Britain. The place where Voldemort was going around killing everyone who wasn't a pureblood wizard, as if he was somehow the Nazi champion of all wizard kind and had the right to do so. His reign of terror was still ongoing by the looks of it, and he was receiving undeniable proof that even so much as going to the mall could be a serious hazard as a result. That he could lose his life in the mundane world due to magical means like a spell to the chest, and it would be explained away as a gas leak. After a moment of horrified realization, he remembered the fact that not only was this the case, but that this was a world full of people with casual methods of mind control. Things such as the Imperious Curse or love potions were something of the norm in the world he was in. Hell, they sold the love potions to literal children, and it was implied in canon that Ginny and Molly had been dosing Harry Potter for the entire time. Not outright stated, but yes, the implications were there if you knew where to look for them. His horror only grew when that brought up the rest of Harry's school years. In year 1, he met a possessed professor and a literal troll, a well-known man-eating being that was highly resistant to magic that was let into Hogwarts, as if that was somehow just perfectly fine to have in a school full of children. In his second year, they flew a sentient magic car to get to school, and crashed it into a murderous tree called the Whomping Willow. As if that wasn't terrifying enough, they had to fight both Acromantula, a literal race of giant spiders raised in the school by a half-giant half-wit, and a damned basilisk. Only one of those things was relatively outside of the school, the other of which was literally locked away in the basement, and even in third year there were dementors and a werewolf at the school. Seriously, if that was the standard of security at the premier magical school of the world, what the hell was wrong with all the rest of the planet? Tom wasn't sure he really wanted to know. With all of that taken into account, it painted the world in an entirely different light than what the books had offered to the readers. Then again, what could he expect when the story revolved around the misadventures of 3 school kids without a proper understanding of the world at large? Nothing was truly elaborated on in any lengthy manner, and no matter how much one could claim that it was a children's novel, the fact of the matter was that the world itself as it was presented wasn't exactly safe. Now that he thought about it, living in a world full of dark, hazardous creatures, and potentially actual evil beings, or even just morons wielding spells and waving their wands all over the place, it didn't seem conducive to his long-term health and well-being, no matter how he put it. The fact that if he ever told anyone about his knowledge, he would have it all extracted and then his mind wiped and twisted into something that he truly wasn't was absolutely terrifying. He really should probably look into finding a way to get the fuck off this planet before he ended up dealing with the utter madhouse that the Harry Potter universe was. It would certainly be better for his long-term health and well-being. Home Sweet Home 02. Meet the parents? Kinda. Mostly scheming kid does scheming. Tom wasn't sure if he should be exasperated or just happy that he might be adopted by the 2 geeky potential parents who had decided to come visit the orphanage that day. Sure, judging by the fact that they had come in clothing that could barely be considered a step above casual, they might not have been the most prepared couple for coming to a decently upper-class orphanage, and the way they had to admit that they would be using the special government subsidies for gifted children to help pay for continuing his higher education might have slightly alarmed the matron as well. But he could tell they were honest, hard-working people that just wanted to raise a family while they were still young. He even tentatively approved of them for showing up with all the documents needed to prove they had done their research and were actively working on improving their own lives at the same time, so that he would be able to enjoy himself a little more as he got older, with the potential mother working her way to becoming head chef at a local pub, and the maybe father working as an accountant at a car dealership, with the potential for a better position later on. Well, as long as he can keep up with the accelerated learning pace, I don't see why he can't get school done and out of the way at his own pace, and then have more time to play around when he gets older. Haha. Jerry, the nearly 30 yet already greying man with a neatly trimmed beard, claimed with a jolly laugh. It looked so natural on him, as if he was made for happiness, which was quite nice to see. People like that were far more pleasant to be around than people he associated closely with in his past life, simply because they were the types of people who would see a suffering man on the side of the road in the rain and offer them a ride to the shelter, even if it would make them a few minutes late to work. Perhaps he wouldn't offer direct monetary help to those in need, or perhaps he would. It was still admirable, even if Tom could never see himself doing so without some guarantee of fair compensation. It was the nature of who he was at his core. A greedy, selfish man who wanted nothing more than to have a large family and settle down somewhere safe and happy to allow them peace. Who knows? If he managed what he wanted to do, perhaps he would take them along, if they treated him kindly at least. Turning to the mother, she seemed much more shy. She blushed a lot, stuttering lightly when asked to speak, and mostly having to be prompted to say more than a few words at a time. Tom wasn't entirely sure why she seemed so intimidated by the matron's admittedly somewhat intense stare, but he was sure that she would be just fine once she realized that she wasn't being judged, but rather, the matron was probably trying to decide if it would be polite to hug the poor woman. Is there something wrong?" the mother, a young red-haired woman by the name of Ashley, asked with a hint of confusion, concern colouring her voice with a strange tone. It wasn't her fault for thinking there was, really. The matron had been staring. The older, slightly rotund woman shook her head with a small smile, handing out the last of the forms they'd need to adopt Tom and have him become a part of their family. "Nothing, dear. I was just reminded of an old friend of mine. She was quite timid as well, you see," she claimed with a light chuckle, patting the young 4-year-old boy on the head. Clearing her throat, the matron decided it would be a good time to bring up the potential schooling options they had gone over that had accepted him for being quite a bit above the norm compared to other children in this world. He was quite well known among them already as a once-in-a-lifetime genius, one that might in fact become the next great scientist in the world if given the attention he deserved. Also, they claimed. There are 3 major schools in the UK that might just be able to accept him for a full scholarship, considering he had passed the exams necessary for entry. Well, if he was being honest, he had somewhat cheated. It wouldn't be fun to have to go through schooling from scratch all over again, so Tom had made sure to check the syllabus of his older roommates and visit the library to check what the answers to all the possible questions that were usually asked on the tests would be. Even then, he still had to rely on his past life knowledge, so he did feel a little like he hadn't really earned such special treatment in this life either way. Would he use it to his advantage? Most definitely. But he obviously wasn't about to deliberately hold back his knowledge to look like he was a normal child either way, so that was a given. For one, that would look incredibly suspicious if he did. For two, he genuinely did not remember how to act like a child. He specifically remembered how embarrassing it was to have to relearn how to talk, let alone how to walk, and his bladder control was still an issue during long outings. Each step in his path had to be carefully measured at first, lest he overestimate his stride and fall flat on his face. Once he had learned how to talk and walk, he was rather quick to grab the first thing he could see to learn how to read the local languages. His native language in his last life was English as well, but it was American English, which was a whole different beast when compared to British English. This wasn't even accounting for the brain rot of the 2020s, where people seemed to think memes such as Amogus and Skidderby Riz were the peak of entertainment, and that they should be allowed to make their way into the common tongue during casual conversation. Such foolishness had thankfully not infected him as well before the end, but it did make it rather hard to find intelligent conversational partners for a while in the years leading up to his unfortunate demise. He had plenty of time to think about it, and though he couldn't say he missed his previous life, he simply wished he had not been reborn into the world he was, even if it was with the meta-knowledge he had of the series as a whole. As a result, while it took Tom a bit longer than he would have liked, he became fluent in the local language once more, and was quite confident in saying he was at least passable as a 9th grader in terms of average schooling level by the time he was 4 again, which is what led to the matron looking into schools that could accept him in on a scholarship while keeping him ahead of the rest of his peers. A private school that would assign him a personal tutor and help him test out as early as they could legally allow. The other orphans were a little jealous of him at first, seeing him as a potential rival or some snobby brat that must surely be looking down on them at first. But he managed to win over quite a few of them when he mentioned that it wasn't as if they didn't have their own talents as well, and that he would help them discover them if they wanted to reach out to him in return. Tentatively at first, some actually did. He would keep in touch with them when he was adopted, and perhaps they could be useful down the line. "Well then, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, congratulations, he's all yours," she told them with a small smile, causing the look on Tom's face to turn from pensive to slightly sour. His blue eyes narrowed as he realised he wouldn't be getting rid of his somewhat silly name any time soon. At the same time, he wasn't truly old enough to ask for a change of legal name, so he supposed he would simply have to deal with it for the time being. "Thank you, Ma'am. We'll be sure to take good care of him," Jerry told the woman with a bright sunny smile as he stood from his seat, the chair nearly lifting with him in his hurry to shake her hand. It wasn't like the man was what Tom would call obese, but he was a rather large man, and very jolly by the looks of things over the past few visits. Either way, the young black-haired boy figured he would be in good hands indeed, and was already contemplating ways to help them take care of him, so that they wouldn't feel the strain of taking care of him as much as they might otherwise have. It would help him more in the long run if he didn't have to move homes too many times, and he was well liked in his community after all. The more personable he seemed, the better off he would be if something went awry and people found out about his plans early on. Even Dumbledore, A renowned wizard that was well known to be kind and caring by the masses had some serious skeletons in his closet. So, he was under no illusions that if he were to be considered a threat to anyone that he wouldn't just quietly disappear. However, by making himself a valued member of society simply by acting as if he was a much better person than he truly was, he would be able to have others alleviate any concerns for him passively by saying that he was kind and caring or other such things, and that he would never do something that would bring others harm. While this was far from being the truth, he desperately needed it to seem as such for his long-term plans barely formed in his youthful mind to come to fruition. He could only hope that he ended up at Hogwarts, because that would only help him in the long run for a lot of his plans going forwards. And the room of requirement would definitely be a necessity for him going forwards after all. Home Sweet Home 03, the end of the beginning of the beginning. It was October 31st, 1981, the night of Halloween. Tom's parents had been forced to work over the holiday, so he was wandering the streets of London looking for any signs of the leaky cauldron, and where that might potentially be. He absolutely needed confirmation that he had magic of his own, if only for the sheer fact that this world was dangerous. He couldn't afford to be caught unaware, and all his attempts to force out accidental magic from him in some way had utterly failed no matter what he had tried. From using various tricks like meditation, to jump scaring himself with movies, and even challenging the various fears he had by rushing into the storage room in their home in search of spiders to scare himself with, he had found nothing that could bring out even an ounce of magic, not one single thing. So, he was desperate. He pleaded to any deities that may hear him that something would show him that he had something, even as he adjusted his little vampire outfit and walked past a shady-looking run-down pub of sorts that smelled awfully of piss. And as he rounded the next corner to get away from the smell, an older lady walked over to him from inside the pub, dressed as a stereotypical hag from modern-day folklore and popular books. When she approached him, she giggled and tried to touch him on the nose. "Cakey, aren't you a cute little vampire?" she told him with a small, knowing smirk. "Tell me, little one, where are your parents?" As she asked him this, he could see that she was continually trying to touch and corner him, and he didn't like the odds of what would happen if she did. So he panicked. Hard. "You can't see me? You can't see me," he told her as he backed away with slow, deliberate steps, the strange older woman seeming to be lost and confused for a moment, her eyes glazing over and losing focus. Was this? "Where did that brat go? I almost had him," she exclaimed with a low grumble, causing him to think as fast as he could, while he still had the effect going full blast. He could only hope it would work. Focusing on the sensation he was feeling inside, he threw everything he could into it and let his fear fuel it fully. "I don't exist to you. I never did," he exclaimed, causing her eyes to blank out once more, her body freezing for a moment before she scratched at her long, hopefully fake nose. Once she had a moment to recover, and he was rather far away, hiding behind a car, she looked around and shrugged to herself, as if she wasn't entirely sure what she was doing. "Huh, weird. Could have sworn I came out of the pub for something important." "Never mind then," she said to herself before walking straight back into the pub. One with a faded sign above it that had the words "The Leaky Cauldron" written upon it as if in some form of mockery to all the effort he had put in. Needless to say, he left in a hurry, not wanting to find out what would happen if he stuck around such a shady place filled with wizards on Halloween. "Dad, how can one prove that they're financially independent to the government?" Tom asked his adopted father, his lips curled into a pensive frown as he sipped a cup of tea. He was going over the stock exchanges his father had helped him with so far in the financial reports. But he felt he still was a rather large financial burden on his family, and had sought to rectify this for a few years by that point. "Well, you need to have a stable source of income, be considered provably and observably mature in a few ways, and be 15 years of age. Why do you ask?" Jerry asked him, his head tilting as if he was not entirely sure where he was going with such a question. Well, it was rather sudden to him, he was sure. It's not like Tom had been advertising it to his parents that had done their best to raise him for so long. "It's not really important, Dad. Just thoughts for long-term options in case of the worst." And he did mean that. His mother, Ashley, had fallen rather sick recently with Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or VCJD from meat she had prepared and eaten at work for break, and the doctor told them that she wasn't likely to make it out alive, that it was always fatal. Jerry sighed, nodding at his son as he pulled the boy into a hug. "Yeah, and with my diabetes acting up these days. I understand your worry, he told Tom with a sad smile, trying to hold strong for the both of them. But don't worry. Doctor said I just have to watch what I eat and I'll be fine. No insulin needed. With the way things were going, Tom wasn't sure his father would make it to see him graduate. He would do his best to find him something to help. Maybe some form of magical protein shake he could have if he was low on blood sugar at work. It just might save his life, probably. But it was still best to prepare for the worst, even so, though he couldn't bring himself to say that to the man who'd been taking care of him all these years. If you say so, Dad. Well, at the very least, his past life experience as a bank manager had granted him knowledge that he used religiously to invest in various big tech firms so far, such as Microsoft, Sony and Apple. The value of those had nearly tripled by the time he had turned 11 in 1986, despite him only buying them a few years prior. It would be an amazing resource to call on when he needed money to buy any magical reagents he might need for his rituals, to be honest. He had also suggested options like McDonald's, but it would look incredibly suspicious if he mentioned Google by name, so he waited for that company to be nearing conception before he'd bring up the idea of something similar. It wasn't as if he could just claim to be from the future and expect that to go over well after all. At the very least, his exercise routine had increased his stamina to the point where he was fully confident he could outrun many people that were a lot older than him, as long as they didn't also train physically. He was good enough to get offered a spot on the track and swimming teams at school far ahead of his year after all. Of course, he hadn't slacked on his studies either. In fact, the reason he had asked his father about emancipation was because he had graduated high school last semester after many long, grueling hours of hard work and sacrificed sleep just to make sure he got it right. That he aced the test was all a result of his hard work and dedication. Let no one say that he didn't work for what he got, as he made sure to always improve, to do better in everything as much as he was capable, and to always test those limitations. While they sat and ate their morning toast, a tawny owl knocked on the window with a letter, something that was odd to his father and that could have only one meaning for Tom. Rushing over from where he sat at the living room table, he opened the window and let the bird inside. It was quick to drop the letter in his lap and look at him with an oddly expectant expression for a bird. When he saw the seal of Hogwarts and opened the letter with care, he smiled. Dear Tom, Dick, Harry. And so began the prologue of what he would later look back on as one of the most terrifying legs of his journey. The humble beginnings of a gentlemanly mage, a mage looking for their home sweet home 04, Diagon Alley. Summer was almost at its end, and Tom was somewhat excited to meet whoever was supposed to take him to see the wizarding world for the first time. He was intrigued by the thought of being allowed to ask the questions he had bubbling up from within his mind at a young age, but wasn't entirely sure which professor would be the one assigned to come pick him up. From what he remembered of the books, McGonagall would likely be the most willing to answer questions about wizarding sports and transformation-based spells, but she would also be the most strict about what was and was not allowed to be mentioned otherwise. Snape would probably not be willing to help beyond what his job demanded of him, honestly. And Sprout seemed like someone who would simply drag him around like a whirlwind and get it done as fast as possible so she could go tend to her plants. If he had a choice in who would be the best professor to introduce him to the wizarding world, only Flitwick would be the most willing to go over his questions in full detail and answer them with any sort of enthusiasm. Because of this, he truly hoped that he would be received by the half-goblin charms professor, if he was being honest. It would make things a lot easier for him at least. A man in a black business suit with a green tie appeared directly at their doorstep as he thought about these things, and rang the doorbell without a moment's hesitation, exactly on the minute he was supposed to arrive. Was he perhaps running a bit late? When his father opened the door, Tom noticed that the man's black hair was slicked back with a professional grease of some sort, likely done in a way to keep it out of his face when it came time to do work or business. His crooked hook of a nose was likely the result of it having been broken a few too many times, but he didn't seem to bother with the magical cosmetics he could have had to remove such things from himself if he deemed it necessary. "This is the residence of Tom, Dick, Harry and his father, I presume?" the man asked them, receiving a nod from his father and a blank stare from the young reincarnation. Was the man trying to start a fight with the amount of snark oozing off of him, like some edgy teenager from the depths of angst and despair? "Yes, it is," Jerry told him, unable to keep himself from smiling at the man. Was there history there, or was it just nostalgia his father was showing in his expression? Because it seemed like something strange was going on between them, and he wasn't sure he could put his finger on it just yet. Well, I would normally go over the demonstration of magic and display the veracity of its existence, but your wife's family was quite well known in the fields of potion making, even if she herself was from a branch that had been disowned. So I'm sure she has at least explained its existence to you before, he asked Jerry with a hint of a frown on his face, as if he wasn't sure what to make of the man. This was kind of ridiculous and also entirely news to Tom. Not in depth. Beyond that, she had left that life behind her due to a lack of funds to finish her schooling at the time, Jerry said with a shrug, not bothering to elaborate on it. He was the type that never truly pushed for answers for things unless they were truly necessary, so Tom understood the reasons behind it and could respect the sentiment. I've always wanted to go take a look into getting her some sort of courses to finish it up for a gift one year, but we didn't manage to save up enough before. Well. Ah, yes, I understand, Snape nodded, his eyes oddly unfocused for a minute as if he was feeling a strange sense of disappointed loss himself. Something like the loss of a particularly good apprentice, potentially. Seeing that as a potential avenue of approach, Tom tried something that he figured might help gauge the professor a little in his mind. Doctors said Mum has a year to live at best, he said, brushing his black hair from his eyes with a small frown. She ate some really bad meat and got very sick from it. I don't know what we can do. Call me Professor Snape. I'll see if St. Mungo's has anyone available later today to take a look at her. It would be remiss of me to ignore this when it could affect your grades poorly on your first year at Hogwarts, Snape told him with a firm look, seemingly ready to help. It was quite telling that the man had jumped straight to offering support despite his portrayal in the books. The man may have had his reasons for it, but Tom felt he could use this if he played his cards right. Tom nodded at Snape, grateful for the fact that he'd at least try to help. Not everyone he knew of would be so willing, especially not for someone they hardly knew. Thanks, Professor. I would prefer if you didn't mention it. I can't help everyone, but I can at least see what can be done for your mother while I am at my meeting later today, the dark-haired man told him with an almost bored tone. Tom wondered if that tone was simply a result of some sort of physical malady or disfigurement, rather than a personality trait, because Snape didn't actually seem to be as much of an ass as the book said he was. Well, we should be off. There's very little time today and much that needs to be done, the Hogwarts professor told him in no uncertain terms. A moment passed where he held out his hand, likely ready to apparate them to their destination. 1 minute. I should probably bring my blood sugar tester and grab my car keys so you don't need to waste your gas, Jerry told them with a sigh, his hand going up to rub his beard. That would probably have been nice, if it wasn't for the wizard's ability to teleport. That won't be necessary, Snape told him with a sharp look at his watch. Also, I highly recommend you leave any Muggle electronics behind, unless you feel the need to both claim injury to miss work for a while and feel the need to replace whatever it is you bring with you if it contains any sort of battery. Tom looked between them with a sigh, as Jerry gave him the most confused look he'd ever seen on the man. His digital watch and blood testing device both worked off of batteries, so he would have to leave both of those behind. Jerry seemed to recover after a moment, his expression morphing into one of slight embarrassment. I can't go out without my blood tester, not if I want to be sure that I can make it through the day, he told the professor, a sheepish grin on his face. Then perhaps it would be best if you didn't come this time. There will be plenty of chances later once your health and well-being can be assured, Professor Snape noted with a raised eyebrow, as if daring the man to try to tell him otherwise. Tom really hoped that the professor was aware of how he looked, even when he was trying to be helpful, because this had to be deliberate. Oh, well, I suppose I should send some money with you and Tom so he can afford to buy the things he needs, Jerry noted, looking as though he felt a bit lost. It was only natural, as the man likely wanted to support his son more directly during his school shopping trip, having set aside the whole day to do so. If you wish to help provide your son with extra spending money in the wizarding world for extra things he may wish for, that would be fine, though his scholarship and grant should be enough to cover the basics at least, Snape told him with a smirk, allowing himself to enjoy the man's willingness to help his son by the looks of it. Of course, but my son might want a few extra books or things not on the list, so it would be best if I gave him enough to play with, Jerry chuckled, fishing his wallet out of his jacket to retrieve some money. How much do you think he will need to buy himself a decent set of books to last the year and somewhere to store them? The man asked with a jolly grin, having already taken out several £100s from his wallet, due to not quite knowing how much a decent trunk would cost. With the school grant already paying for a standard trunk, and the current exchange rate from Muggle currency to galleons, that amount in your hand would be enough to afford a locked and protected magical trunk with an extra storage section he can fill with books, and a few extra books he can peruse for whatever purposes he may desire, Snape told him with a nod of respect. Anything further would likely be better purchased next year when he decides what subjects he wants to focus on the most. Passing Tom the money, Jerry patted his son on the head. "Well, I'll see you when you get back, Tom," Jerry said with a wave and a smile, allowing them to go on without him. At the very least, Tom knew that his adopted father could be very reasonable and rather helpful in most situations. It was one of the reasons that Tom respected him so much. With that, Tom nodded, brushing his black hair out of his face and taking Snape's hand. "Bye, Dad. I'll be back as soon as I can," he said with a small smile. "Very good. Now don't let go of my hand until I say so," Snape told him as he prepared to leave. "There have been far too many children going missing in Diagon Alley for my liking these past few months." Tom nodded, and then with a sharp twist they were in an alley nearby the place he himself had nearly been kidnapped. The Leaky Cauldron. If Snape noticed his slight fear as they left the back alley and made their way through the front of the building, he didn't comment. The young man was grateful for that, because even if he was mentally old enough to know how to deal with such things, he was still small and weak, and was smart enough to know that this was all that mattered in the grand scheme of things if someone was determined to kidnap him. Such fears would be natural in a scenario like this, so he didn't know if he could keep himself from being slightly rude if the man tried to comment on it at all. After a moment or two of them passing through a busy and crowded pub, they made their way back into another alley, where Snape pulled out his wand and began to point it at the brick wall. "There are a few ways to get into Diagon Alley from here," he told the young boy with a tilt of his head towards a particular brick in the wall. Most are told that they must press the bricks with their wand in a particular pattern to get in, but the truth of the matter is that you need only to push your magic into the wall, and you will be let in much faster, without the need to remember a silly passcode. "Thanks," Tom told him as the wall melted away, the bricks seemingly folding in on themselves and disappearing from sight in a near instant as they entered the alley. Once they were there, Professor Snape began to guide him over to a large, opulent building made of marble and gold, and inlaid with many shimmering runes and crystals. As they approached, he took note of the vague threat carved into the doors of what must have been the bank, below the sign that specifically noted it as Gringotts Wizarding Bank. "Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed. For those who take but do not earn must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours, thief, you have been warned. Beware of finding more than treasure there." He found it slightly amusing that they felt the need to make it rhyme, and rather cheeky at that. But he knew that he would never have to worry about finding out about such things first-hand in his mind, simply because if he was going to steal from someone, it wouldn't be the place where he did his own banking. That simply screamed stupidity, if he was being honest. Anyone who attempted such things deserved what came to them as a direct result of their actions. They slowly walked through the building, approaching one of the empty tellers as they could with a sign that said, "Premium Clients and Businesses," hanging above it. Snape rang the bell and waited for the goblin seated there to stop grumbling about his paperwork and look up with the most depressed face Tom had seen on anything, even one with long, pointed ears, balding white hair, and likely the most ugly face he had ever seen on any being in either of his lives. "Ah, Severus Snape, it's good you came in today because your bank manager wants to set up an appointment regarding some of your potion services as soon as possible," the grumpy and tired goblin told him with a slight sneer. "Let's get your business here dealt with, but be sure to send an owl with your available times tonight. I refuse to be held accountable if you are late with your response." "Understandable, Rotgut. I'll be brief," Snape told the teller with a look of derision. It was almost as if he didn't like the goblin, and he could understand why. "I have a Hogwarts student in need of his grants, as well as an exchange from Muggle pounds to wizarding currency, before I conclude my business with a small withdrawal of my own for some personal purchases I need to make for the year." The goblin nodded, holding out his hand to receive the money. His nails had been sharpened into long yellow claws by the look of things, and it was with a grimace that he tapped his fingers on the desk first and pulled out a sheet of paper to put on it. "Very well, let's make this quick," he told them with an annoyed frown. And quick it was. They exchanged the currencies and received the scholarships and grants for the things they needed and were on their way before long. "Professor," Tom began as they approached the first shop of the day, the robes shop. Something that made him wonder, as not every wizard in the area seemed to be using robes in the first place. Are there any special books or things I should be aware of that might help learn the customs and etiquette of wizarding society, so that I don't make an utter fool of myself when I get to Hogwarts?" Raising an eyebrow at the youth, Snape nodded in approval. "Yes, I will point them out to you when we arrive at the bookstore. The best of which was in fact written by one of the former professors at Hogwarts during his tenure, Professor Horace Slughorn," he told Tom as they entered the clothing boutique. A large store with a flowing fabric sign that stated its name in bold, slightly stylish font. Madame Malkin's was the name emblazoned on the cloth, showing the professionalism and skill the creator had in one advertisement. "Hogwarts?" a rather large lady at the counter asked with a small grin, waving them over to sit on the chairs next to someone with bright bubblegum pink hair. "I'll be with you in just a moment. I'll be needing my attention for this one as much as possible." When the girl turned and grew 2 inches on the spot, her hair switching to a deeper red and lengthening as she saw him, he instantly understood why. "Watcha, mate, just about finished here," the girl claimed with a bright, cheery grin, her British accent thick enough to make him pause for a moment just so he could process what it was she had said. "Right. Don't mind me then. I'll just wait over here," Tom told her with an awkward smile, scratching his cheek lightly as he sat on the indicated stool while he waited for his turn. He took a brief moment to look around the room, but his attention kept wandering back to the girl, who seemed to be shape-shifting to make silly faces at him in an attempt to make him laugh. "Oh, come on then. No need to be so serious. We're going to the same school after all," the girl told him with a laugh when he finally turned to look at her properly. Tom was almost annoyed that she was taking up his time by making the wait longer with her constant shape-shifting. "You can call me Tonks." "No offence, but I'm on a tight schedule and I didn't ask," Tom told her, feeling a little bad about bursting her bubble in such a way. In an attempt to soften the blow, because he knew just how that sounded the moment he said it, he continued in a lighter tone. "Maybe we can talk some other time when I'm not in a hurry." "Ah, yeah, no worries, mate. Sorry for the hold-up," she told him with a wink, not taking it to heart in the slightest. At least that was settled nicely, and she was able to get the rest of her fitting done without issues. "All right, thank you for waiting patiently, dear. I am Madame Malkin, and you're here to get your first set of Hogwarts robes, yes?" the proprietress asked him while she started on his measurements. "I'll get you measured in a jiffy, mister. What was your name, young man?" "Tom," he told her with a small frown. "Tom, Dick, Harry." "Cute, but I'll need your real name for the order, not a pseudonym," the woman said with a groan. Was this woman serious? "I'll have you know that that is his real name, despite any thoughts you may have on the matter," Professor Snape told her with a sneer, daring her to say otherwise. He seemed just as annoyed as he was about it, and was ready to demand her to get working, though that may have just been because she was wasting their time. It took her a minute to realise what that meant before she blanched. Apparently she realised her mistake and was quick to correct herself from the rather dumb mistake she had made. Oh, you poor thing. Can you please just take my measurements and let us pay so we can get the rest of our shopping done for the day?" Tom asked with a hint of annoyance. He might not have been whining, but it was damn near close with how embarrassed he was by the woman's blundering social mistakes. "Right, of course. Hold still and I'll have you sorted out in a jiffy," Madame Malkin told him with a light grin, her magic curling as she waved her wand at a length of cloth and a set of needles. At the very least, she was professional in the quality of her work, if not her ability to converse without saying something mildly offensive. After about half an hour of getting proper fitting for all of his needed clothing, he sighed as Severus paid the woman the gold, silver and bronze coins she'd asked for, and they went on their way while she worked on fully making the clothes he would need for a year at Hogwarts. "Next, we will need to acquire you a wand," Professor Snape told Tom with a slight tug at the boy's wrist. He seemed rather impatient, which was understandable, considering how much time had been wasted working with the clothing shop lady. "The wand shop, Ollivander's, is just down the street," the professor claimed, pointing to it as they walked as fast as they could to avoid the oncoming crowds. After a moment of consideration while they made their way to their destination, Snape sighed and seemed to decide it was best to explain why they were going there next. Selecting a wand for people is usually rather messy when it comes to first years, so it is prudent that we shop for one before we gather volatile ingredients or fragile books and writing instruments, lest we find ourselves in need of replacements before we have even begun. "Right. Sounds reasonable enough," Tom agreed, making his way up to the door with the professor's guidance. The entrance looked like it had seen better days, likely the result of various explosions or other such incidents over the course of the day, yet it still opened for them properly and without injury nonetheless. When they opened the door, a man with frazzled white hair sticking up in all directions zoomed out from where he was working on a tall ladder, scaling down it in an instant to gaze into Tom's eyes with a small hint of something there. Ah, yes, an old soul, flexible and easily corrupted at that. "You'll need one of my beechwood wands, then," he said gently, turning around to reach behind him with a small smile. How the bloody hell did he figure that out? Did he read his mind? Was he using mind magic? As he attempted to calm himself, the wand-maker took a wand out of its box and handed it to him with a smile. "Try this one. Beechwood, dragon heartstring, 12 inches and quite supple as well," the man said, not bothering to introduce himself as he let the child hold what was essentially a deadly weapon. When he finally began to lift it, allowing his magic to reach out to it in full, he could feel the connection it made with him. It felt like a friend or a partner, ready to coax out his magical energy and help him control it for a bit of true magic. The tip lit up with a brilliant kaleidoscope of colours, reminding him of what he had decided to study for, why he needed to leave this world. Something in his eyes, or perhaps his mind, as he thought of the possibilities, caught the attention of Garrick Ollivander at that very moment. "Well now, I have high hopes for you," he claimed with a small grin, allowing the boy to see that yes, he was in fact reading his mind the entire time. "If you happen to take an interest in wand lore during your time at Hogwarts, or how to make them, you can come to me during the summers. I happen to have plenty of experience on the subject, as you can see." Snape merely raised an eyebrow at that as he handed the man the necessary coin to pay for the wand and a maintenance kit. "We shall be taking our leave for now, Mr. Ollivander. I'm sure he can give you an answer when he doesn't look like a deer caught between a griffin and a manticore," Snape told him with his nose slightly upturned. It was clear that there was something going on there that Tom wasn't ready to poke at, no matter how curious he was. "Of course, it's an open offer either way," the wand-maker smiled, accepting the money and providing the necessary items and receipt. It wasn't every day that one received offers of apprenticeship as a first year, but Tom was still unsure it would be wise. He didn't know the man after all, so he could be after something entirely horrifying with his knowledge. The encounter with the old wand-maker only reminded him that he would need to learn some mind magic of his own to keep himself guarded, something to protect him against those who wished to steal his secrets. "Very well," Snape acquiesced, before tugging on Tom's wrist to guide him out of the shop and back out onto the street once more. "We shall acquire your trunk before we go any further on this trip. It will save us having to arrange delivery and is a rather simple process." Tom nodded, slight weariness and exhaustion starting to kick in from the day thus far, yet not enough to cause any true issues quite yet. His mind focused on the thoughts of wizarding logistics for a moment, the odd image of an owl carrying what was likely several pounds worth of potentially dangerous potions ingredients, and trying not to accidentally jostle them too much as it flew. Yeah, that would make a lot more sense than trying to buy everything without something to hold it, he noted, very much aware of how ridiculous that could end up being. Professor Snape guided Tom to what appeared to be a narrow building sandwiched between two other buildings, a small sign held up by the doorframe that had the words "Bags and Trunks" written on it in bold letters. Once they opened the door and made their way inside, however, Tom realised something simply magical was at play there. "Huh, it's bigger on the inside," the young man remarked, drawing a small smirk from Snape, though it was quickly removed, as though it reminded him of something he would rather not think about after a moment of reminiscence. Tom knew better than to ask about the professor's personal life when he hardly knew the man, though, so he wisely chose not to. "Right you are, chap. This store is made in the same way as all of our best expanded magical trunks, which you won't be needing quite yet as young as you are, but that are still very handy later on," the salesman claimed as he made his way over to them in a hurry. His average height and looks made the man seem almost unassuming, or even mildly friendly, despite that not usually being a good indicator, so Tom knew there was something up with the man. Unfortunately, he wasn't versed enough in magic to figure out what exactly it was, and he was unwilling to pry when he wasn't strong enough to protect himself from the repercussions. "He will be needing a trunk with an anti-unlocking charm, preferably one with multiple compartments for things such as potions and books," Professor Snape told the man with the tone of someone who would much rather be done with shopping in this store. It did somewhat make sense, as the man's bright and cheery attitude did come across as mildly grating, if you had other things on the mind. Also, why did he need to say the word charm twice? It was so redundant. "Righto then. Let's get started, shall we?" the man asked, guiding them to the counter near the rear of the store, where a large catalogue was situated. "I reckon you won't want something too fancy today, yeah?" "Probably something reliable but on a budget," he confirmed with them, getting a nod from Professor Snape before he continued. "In that case, might I recommend a refurbished trunk? Those will have a much lower price tag and will be able to hold much more due to having absorbed the ambient magic in places like Hogwarts, which we then use to re-enchant the trunk." "Sounds like there is a catch," Tom told him outright, knowing full well that when something sounded too good to be true, it usually was. He had dealt with such things multiple times in his previous life, after all. "Ah, yeah. You'll not get as much life out of them, because they don't have compatibility with preservation charms directly on the wood. Not much of an issue if you just take care of your trunk, but if you're going on an adventure in the desert or some other risky place, it's best to get a new trunk that's made for that." "You won't need to worry about preservation charms all that much, dearie," an older woman near one of the shelves told him with a small smile. "Just learn the repair charm and have a bit of material nearby to fix it with. You'll be fine to repair it yourself as long as you don't get a multi-tiered expanded trunk." She brushed a lock of curly blonde hair out of her face and smiled at him. At that point, it's probably best to leave repairs to the professionals. The vaguely friendly-seeming man sighed, as if about to deal with something even he wasn't sure he could handle. He gripped the catalogue with both hands and made sure to flip the pages gently over to the section of the book that they needed without tearing the pages out by mistake. "Ah, right, Miss Umbridge. I will be right with you once I'm done over here." Tom realised that these two must have had a history between them, something that might cause friction that he didn't want to be around for. "Perhaps we can hurry," Snape demanded, checking a fancy watch as the man reached the page he wanted. "I don't have all day." Honestly, neither did Tom. He wanted to go back home and take a nap after all of this so he could be refreshed for his studies, so he had very little interest in seeing how this would play out. Right. Well, this should be the selection of trunks that fit your needs. All you need to do is pick a colour, really, because these ones are all the same, he told Tom with a frown, allowing the boy to go over his choices. Brushing the dark hair from his blue eyes as he looked over it, Tom absently decided to go get his hair trimmed when he arrived at home, even as he selected the average-looking dark grey trunk that would blend in with its surroundings well at night, reducing the risk of theft while he slept. "I'll take that one," he told the man gently, enjoying the look of approval he got when the salesman realised immediately why he wanted it. "Solid choice. Let's get that one out for you, shall we?" he asked, pointing his wand at one of the drawers on the counter and withdrawing a small trunk, which he then unshrunk as he put it on the counter. "That will be—" Once they had paid the man, they went on their way to the potion store, as it was harder to store potion materials than it was books, and the compartment for potions in the trunk was a sealed compartment that was lower in the box than the expanded bookshelf when opened. It simply made more sense to go there first than it did to go to the bookstore, especially with how Snape had managed to somehow force the man to lower the price of the trunk by half the amount that he had expected Tom to need to pay, by sheer value of glaring umbrage into leaving the store when she tried to, but in on the quality of the trunks and apparently of the salesman's blood, leaving him with plenty of money for ingredients and books. Well, to be fair to the witch, she was just trying to help in her own way. It's just that the way she went about it was fairly rude and unnecessary. It was fine though, and since they had finally arrived at the potion shop despite the busy day, Snape seemed to perk up a little. As they entered the store, Snape made a beeline straight to the potions kits, still guiding him around so that he wouldn't be snatched away by some stranger. The professor took his job seriously, that much was certain, but he most definitely had a passion for potions. After a moment of looking through them, he turned sharply, wheeling on the shop owner with a furious look on his face. "What is this?" he asked, holding up what looked to be the high-end potions kit based on the tag. "Why are almost half of the ingredients of subpar quality in the most expensive potions kit you sell?" His voice contained such disdain for the man that it was almost amusing to watch, honestly. "Surely you jest, sir. Those are premium quality, I assure you," the man claimed with a smirk, as if trying to challenge the man. This was going to be a problem. "I am one of the foremost potion masters in Britain. I can guarantee that if these ingredients do not give you the results you desire, then you are the problem, not my ingredients." Snape looked at him as if he was the scum of the earth, his dark eyes narrowing on the shopkeeper as he continued to dig himself deeper and deeper holes. "I see. Then perhaps you would like to explain to me why the toad liver is stored in olive oil instead of a proper toad oil from the very toads they were taken from, or why the horned slugs are dried and salted instead of being preserved alive by non-magical nutrient slime, That's without getting into the other, more concerning mistakes you had made. The professor was furious. It was clear to see in his eyes that this man likely wouldn't have a job within the week. Here, what would you know? You're just a muggle-born and his brat. I have a signed business license and trade endorsement from Severus Snape and Horace Slughorn themselves. The world's greatest potion masters ever seen, the man claimed with a triumphant grin, enjoying himself far too much. He seemed to think he had won, even as Severus Snape, who was standing right in front of him, raised an eyebrow and shook his head. I think not, Snape told the man with a snarl. Come, Tom, I will report this fraud to Dumbledore before he can poison the youth any more than he already has, preferably before he causes my students to wreck their cauldrons with trash. They left the store in a hurry, leaving the potion kits behind as he brought Tom to Flourish and Blots. It will cut into my budget for the year, but it seems I will need to put out a letter to boycott that store and simply have the students take the ingredients I can provide to them from my supplier for now, he grumbled, likely calculating how much it would take him to get potions ingredients for the entire school with his potions budget. It's a good thing I received a large donation for my work on other things I've completed this year, otherwise I likely wouldn't have been able to afford it. That man seemed like a real piece of work, Tom agreed, frowning at the sheer idiocy of the other man. He was definitely not going to enjoy dealing with shopkeepers in the wizarding world, as the majority of them seemed to have various issues he would really rather not deal with. Still, he did appreciate the professor's help. I'm glad I came here with you, and didn't get scammed because you caught it before it could happen. Yes. Well, it was rather enlightening to discover why there were so many reports of faulty cauldrons, as well as why so many students were having nearly fatal accidents almost every single time the class was held, Professor Snape told him, a grimace on his face as he brought several books to Tom's attention. Things he would need at Hogwarts to succeed, along with books on several other topics such as magical plants and creatures and how to harvest them, along with a copy of a book called Potions for the Absolute Dunderhead Volume 1 by the Prince of Potions. That last book had been hiding on a shelf in the back, nearly forgotten for some reason, but Snape assured him of its quality and showed him how it broke down the steps involved in potion making for those who didn't have prior experience with such things in an easy-to-read format with instructional pictures. Why this was in the most forgotten part of the bookstore he had no idea, but it certainly seemed useful after looking through it, if a bit condescending and rude the entire way through. If you could put down your pride, however, it seemed like it was probably the best book on the shelves for explaining what he needed to know about how and why things needed to be done a certain way, and how to fix it if it went wrong. After they collected the last of the books needed for the year, including several books on mind magic that he had managed to haggle for with the bookstore owner, he filled his trunk with his purchases, and then they were off. Of course, they stopped to pick up his new clothing and other supplies he needed from elsewhere, but nothing out of the ordinary, or even all that interesting, happened during the rest of their allotted time. I better get you home now so I can finish with my appointments for the day, the exhausted-looking Professor Snape told him with a sigh. I'll be sure to inquire about what can be done for your mother, while at my first appointment at St. Mungo's before I leave for my meeting with Gringotts Bank, so you needn't worry about that any further. Thanks, Professor, you've been a great help, Tom stated just before the Professor apparated them back to his home from a safe apparition spot. Snape paused before he knocked on the door, showing that he did in fact hear the child. Think nothing of it. I am merely doing my job, he claimed, though his appreciative nod seemed to tell Tom that he was pleased with his politeness. At that, Tom rang the doorbell instead, and they were greeted by Jerry with his phone in his hand and a pizza menu in the other. You're back, and right on time. I was hoping to ask you what pizza you wanted, but my blood sugar was getting rather low, so I ordered 2 of your usual favourites for us to enjoy when they get here. Tom grinned a little. Pizza was always fun. Thanks, Dad. I see you're ready for me to leave. I'll talk to you when you arrive at school for any updates on your mother, Tom. Even if you don't end up in my house, my doors will be open at regular times, Snape told him with a sharp nod, stepping back away from the house as he let go of Tom's hand and handed him the trunk. It would be a few more weeks until he saw the man again, but he had a decent amount of hope growing within him that everything would work out fine for now. Once he had apparated away, Tom realised that he was still standing outside with his trunk and brought it in with a wry grin. Hogwarts would be both his greatest challenge in this world and his greatest asset, and he couldn't wait to get started. Well, shall we? Jerry asked Tom with a smile. Yeah, let's go get the pizza. Home sweet home 05, first year's this way. Steam trains were not exactly something one expected much when one was to visit King's Cross Station in the modern day. Filled with trains that ran on diesel fuel to get people to where they needed to go in their daily lives, the people that used such things on their commute would look at anyone with a hint of confusion if they were told that such a thing existed. This wasn't even counting the fact that Tom and his father had walked directly at a wall between platforms 9 and 10 to arrive at a platform called 9 3/4, like it was the most simple thing in the world. The only requirement to be allowed through was both the knowledge of what was on the other side and the desire to board the train. Either that, or you could have the intention to wait for someone you knew to board or leave the train and then exit the way you came. How the barrier was able to tell such things, Tom would never know, but it made his father feel included and happy to be able to send him off on the train himself. So the dark-haired boy was glad. It had been only a few short weeks at most since his meeting with Professor Snape and his subsequent trip to Diagon Alley, and his father was still in extremely good spirits. As it turned out that the so-called muggle disease that Ashley had caught that was incurable from the bad meat was really just an extraordinarily advanced magical fungus that fed on a person's mental faculties. It would do so until they could no longer think clearly, nor do the things they should normally be capable of doing. And yes, it was entirely curable, with a regime of pretty standard antifungal potions, with a hefty daily dose of calcium and vitamin K recommended for the next several years after to ensure there was no relapse. Unironically, broccoli soup with cheese and cream and anti-brain rot medicine were the prescribed things for Ashley to take, with the medicine only being necessary until Christmas, when she would be able to come home. After that, as long as she ate a lot of dairy and vegetables, she would be just fine. "Make sure you write as often as you can," Jerry told Tom, scooping him up in a tight hug. "I want to hear all about your experiences, any friends you make, and all the things you get up to while you're away, and so does Ash." He brightened even more even as he put the young boy down, and ruffled his medium short-length hair that he had just trimmed for the school year the day before. "She'll be so excited to see you when you come home for Christmas." Tom sighed, giving his dad a wry smile as he picked up his luggage and prepared to carry it onto the train. "Don't worry, Dad. I'll be sure to keep in contact as often as I can afford. Owl mail still costs money even in Hogwarts after all," he said to his father, enjoying the proud look on the older man's face. "I love you, son. Take care of yourself," Jerry told him with a cheery wave before turning around and heading back out from the special platform so that he could get to work on time. Even if the stocks they had invested in so far had made them a bit more well off than before, it was still better for the man to continue working, if only so that he could keep up his rate of advancement in the company and get the potential management position that he had wanted for the last few years. Hefting his trunk with both hands, Tom carried it into the train with a smile, using it as a potential shield against the incoming crowds, even though it held everything he would need for school. Though he would admit that the reason for this was more because he was feeling a bit shy now that his father was gone, and he wanted something else to focus on, rather than the people making their way onto compartments after him. He decided to sit near the very back of the train, simply because he figured most people would be unwilling to walk as far as that. When the rearmost doors onto the train from the platforms ended around the middle, it might allow him the ability to center himself and relax while he read the meditation guide from the bookstore, and help him set up the first steps to proper occlumency. "Hopefully I can get an empty cabin," Tom said to himself, making his way to the compartment at the very rear of the train. It would be best for his studies after all. Though when he did find the cabin he wanted, and it was in fact empty, he found himself joined by a pair of freckled redheads within a rather short amount of time. The train had literally just begun to move as they arrived, and they were quick to sit down on the other side, apologizing as they did so. "Sorry, I heard what you said, but the train's enchanted to force people to share cabins by only having enough space for there to at least be 2 people for each one, and removing empty ones if people try to avoid that," the older one told him with a wry grin. "Figured it would be better if at least someone friendly were to sit with you, that at least know when to be quiet if you needed that as well." "Thanks, mister," Tom prompted, giving them the benefit of the doubt for now. It was unlikely in his mind that the train actually had such an enchantment, but he was certain that these two at least believed that wholeheartedly. "Weasley. I'm Bill Weasley, and this is my brother Charlie," Bill introduced with a smile, offering his hand for a shake at the same time Charlie did. He shook both of their hands in turn and they sat down again properly. "Good to meet you. You can call me Tom," the dark-haired boy told them, watching as Charlie's trunk rattled a little from atop the luggage rack from where it was seated. After a moment of awkward silence, the boy almost went back to his book, but then stopped. He realized it might be a good idea to make connections while he could, as he might need them later on. musing to himself that it might just be worthwhile to get to know a future Cursebreaker and Dragon Handler. "Is there anything about Hogwarts that I should know?" Tom asked the boys with a slightly interested expression, gazing at them as if he was looking to divine the inner workings of magic just by hearing the stories they might have to share. And to be fair, he figured they just might have something he could go off of. Charlie perked up, getting pretty excited on the spot. "Yeah, Bill told me he's going to be taking all the electives. Some of them happen at the exact same time too, which means he's going to have to use a time turner," he claimed, causing Tom's mind to blank for a moment while Bill tried to explain it. Tom knew full well that time turners were a method of time travel that would be incredibly useful in school, but that they were only available among third years or higher to those who were incredibly smart and could actually handle themselves in their use. So don't expect to be given one unless you're top in your class in all the classes you take for your year in both first and second year. Bill finished his explanation, just as Tom realised an important discovery. Something absolutely monumental. The Room of Requirement had time turners. There was absolutely no way in all of the hells of any world that the Hogwarts Room of Requirement did not have a time turner, no matter what anyone was to believe. It was a room that held literally anything one might require and could become whatever you desired. All you needed to do was walk back and forth 3 times on the 7th floor, across from the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy teaching the trolls to dance, while thinking deliberately of what you needed that day. He might even be able to find himself some interesting things to work on while he was there, like copies of the books from the restricted part of the library if he was careful enough, things he really shouldn't be able to access for ages, along with a room for rituals, potions, and ingredients that he may never be able to find without such a room. It was the ultimate hack, a literal cheat code that would likely see him propelled to much greater heights, as long as he did the work himself, and properly researched everything he needed to know on his own. Tom noticed he was taking a while to respond, so he nodded his head and agreed. It wasn't as though he was going to tell the Weasleys about the room after all. He wouldn't put it past them to share the secret room with the whole school, and then he'd be forced to share, or worse. The room would be monitored and off-limits to some years as most likely, if students would be allowed to use it at all. Right. "Well, I think we should let Tom get back to his studies for a bit, Charlie," Bill told the younger redhead with a wry smile. "It looks like he has a lot to go through." Yes, he did. Tom was rather grateful for the suggestion, in fact, as it would allow him a bit more time to figure out how to set up his occlumency barriers to protect his mind. He very much doubted he would be able to figure it out by the end of the day, or even the end of the week, but he knew full well that he needed to have that done by the end of the year. If only for the sake of reducing the risk of being caught with knowledge he really shouldn't have. Not even an hour after he started, however, when Charlie looked like he was just about ready to fall asleep, the young shape-shifting witch from before slammed the door open with a light yelp, seemingly growing a few inches by mistake as she entered the room and smacking her head on the benches when she inevitably fell. It was almost somewhat embarrassing for him, and he hardly knew her at all. "Are you all right?" Charlie asked, getting to his feet in a flash to help the young witch to her feet. His concern for her well-being was somewhat touching, and Tom was sure that he meant well by it. Unfortunately, he also immediately dumped her directly next to Tom, jostling her a bit while she was still recovering, and that caused her to land face-first against his shoulder, dropping his book on the ground. When he picked the book back up again, he discovered that he had lost his place within, specifically during the meditative section that he was supposed to read from start to finish, without pause to prepare his mindset for the next part. That meant he was going to have to reread 10 whole pages of what was a rather small font, simply to reset his mind back into the proper mindset to understand what was being said in the next section. Come to think of it, why would a book on occlumency have a section like that in it? It did seem rather suspicious, so he might have to ask Professor Snape about that once he was free. Maybe there might have been something wrong with the book Tom had picked out on the subject. It might have been nothing, but he should at least get that checked first. You never knew with such things after all. "Ugh," Tonks groaned, sitting up in the seat beside him with a grimace. "Sorry about that. I must have tripped again." "What brought you here, Tonks?" Tom decided to ask, for lack of a better conversation starter. It wasn't like he really knew her well enough for much of anything yet after all. "The compartment I was in was filled with 3 of the most vapid Slytherin airheads I have ever seen. I'm not entirely sure that they understood the references and jokes they were making about so-called blood traitors or mudbloods, but I didn't want any part of it," the pink-haired girl told them in the most aggrieved tone he had ever heard from a young girl. She seemed to be utterly done with people being dumb for the day. and he couldn't blame her. Tom nodded his head at her, his mind full of various thoughts on how utterly dumb they must have been to get this kind of reaction from what seemed to be a particularly cheerful girl. "Sounds rough," he told her with a slight grimace. He knew just how bad it was to have to deal with people who were unable to think for themselves from his past life. After all, you could remove racism from someone's mind with enough effort or blunt force trauma. You could not, however, fix stupidity. "Well, you're at least welcome to sit with us," Tom told her, the Weasley brothers nodding along in agreement with his statement. They had a long train ride ahead of them, and it would likely be better with company, even despite his earlier misgivings. After all, who knew what could have happened to him if he kept reading that book all the way through without getting it checked by a professional? For all he knew, it could be cursed. He was honestly glad he was interrupted at such a timely moment. Yeah, Tom was going to get the book checked as soon as possible, for the sake of his own safety and sanity. "So, Tonks was it?" Charlie asked with a small smile. "I'm Charlie Weasley, and this is my brother Bill." "Pleasure to meet you," Tonks told him with a nod, rubbing her head lightly. At least she was able to be polite despite her embarrassment. While he sat there and ruminated on the thoughts he had about the book and listened to the quiet conversation nearby, a knock sounded at the door. "Anyone want something on the trolley? We got drinks and sweets and lots of tasty treats," the trolley witch said with a small grin. "Oh, I'll take some," Tonks yelled out as she made her way to the door, nearly tripping again in the process. It would be a while before they arrived at Hogwarts, so having something to eat would be a pretty good idea. Checking his pouch for a bit of money, he figured he had enough to buy something filling, some drinks, and maybe a bit of candy or chocolate to enjoy. It couldn't hurt to enjoy himself just a little on the train ride to a private magical school so far away from home. With that settled, he bought himself a chocolate frog and a pack of Bertie Bott's, every flavour beans from the cart for the experience inherent within each of those snacks, along with a turkey sandwich and a hot chocolate to go with it. Once he was seated again with the snacks, Tom held open the box of jelly beans with a grin. "Anyone brave enough to try these with me?" he asked, knowing that they'd all rise to the bait. "All right then, let's have a go at it," Tonks replied with a small smile. Soon they all joined her, taking a small handful each to try one at a time, while they talked about the various wondrous things at the school they were on their way to. By the time the train had rolled to a stop at Hogwarts, the Weasleys and Tom were incredibly tired, and Tonks had nodded off quite some time before. All the topics they could discuss about Hogwarts or magic, Tom had in general were answered to the best of their abilities, and the rare question they couldn't or didn't want to even attempt answering were deferred to a later time, when they actually had the answers he sought. Most of those questions had been along the lines of wizarding customs and laws. Tonks and Charlie had agreed those were a waste of time to learn when they could be talking about much more fun things in their minds. However, Bill was only avoiding answering because he genuinely did not know the answer, and sought the time to rectify that before he led Tom the wrong way by mistake. As he mused about the things he had learned from the train, one of the prefects came to grab them, banging the door open with a slam. "All right then, you lot, get your robes on and let's get moving. You should have done that ages ago, but clearly you didn't think ahead, so chop chop," the slightly older teenage girl told them with a grin. It seemed she found it rather amusing and thought it would be funny to tease them about it. The fact that she continued to stand there and stare at them made the exchange rather creepy, however. She likely didn't mean it to come across as such, but he had the mind of a grown man, so he couldn't help but be a little put off by her apparent enthusiasm for watching children change their clothes, even if he knew she was just having fun messing with them, rather than meaning anything untoward by it. They still changed into their robes, grumbling about it the entire time, and were out of the train before they had time to process that their trunks were still on the train. It was only the fact that the elder Weasley seemed remarkably calm about this that kept the other two from rushing back in to grab theirs, even as Tom was reminded that house elves were indeed a thing, and that Hogwarts had a great many under their employ. Bill was taken off to the carriages shortly after explaining this to the others, while all of the first years soon found themselves standing before what was likely the largest man that any of them had seen in their lives. Someone so huge that Tom had no doubts that if he was to need to resort to violence, his opponents would likely find themselves helpless just from the act of him picking them up by their robes, let alone actually doing something physically harmful, fully grown adult or not. His massive unkempt beard looked to be the length and girth of an average man's chest, and was as dark and wild as the night. He waved to them with a jolly grin, showing them that he was friendly with his every motion as he made his way towards them with a very brightly lit lantern. "First years over here. Come along now," he bellowed naturally, though to him it must have seemed like a rather normal conversational tone to be using when outdoors. It was quite telling that when he waved them over and began to count them all in his head, he also had to use his fingers and look at a rather large list written on parchment to ensure that no one was missing from the group. Of course, finding no one absent, he smiled again while waving an arm towards the lake, with a bright sort of cheer not often found in most normal men. His father would get along pretty well with this man, Tom figured. Right then, we'll be crossing the Great Lake on these boats down by the water, but no more than 4 to a boat. They can't take the extra way, the massive man said, as if that made any sense whatsoever with how large and heavy he was. Honestly, he probably weighed more than 6 of them, despite his words. Still, they followed him down to the shore, finding the exact amount of boats needed to ferry them across the calm, peaceful waters of the lake. Tom sighed, shuffling himself into a boat with the 2 people he had met on the train, while the others did their best impression of gaping fish at the sight of the Hogwarts castle all lit up during the dimly lit night that they happened to arrive in. With the sheer amount of gawking that the students were doing, it was a wonder that none of them had managed to fall into the water when they tried to get in the boats. "Wow, it's so cool!" a young boy nearby exclaimed as they were all situated into the small wooden rowboats for the trip. His eyes were wide with excitement, and he seemed incredibly eager to get to the school. "All right then, we're off," Hagrid called out, tapping the boat he was in with his umbrella, and causing them all to cross the lake at a slow and steady pace, all on their own. Again, how the man managed to sit in one without sinking it was beyond Tom, but the dark-haired boy figured it was probably just some fancy form of magic that was being used on him to make himself lighter than he should be temporarily. "Now don't get any ideas about swimming across the lake while you're here," Hagrid warned them as a few of them began running their hands through the water, testing it to see how clean and cold it was. His voice seemed mostly serious, but with an overtone of amusement as he continued. "The giant squid may be friendly and fun to play with, but most other things in this lake are pretty dangerous." The few students who had been playing with the water as the boat slowly sailed immediately took their hands back out of the water and began to worry just a little. A few of them even began to whisper among themselves, probably muttering conspiracies that Tom couldn't make out due to the distance between them. Unfortunate, yes, as Tom would have loved to hear about anything he might be able to use to his advantage, but it wasn't as though he couldn't simply hear about any rumours later to look up. You never knew which things a student might know that would be an incredibly good thing to avoid while in the school, if only for the sake of avoiding an incredibly painful death. Soon, however, they arrived at a magical waterfall, one that despite them going through it themselves did not leave them wet in the slightest. No. Instead, Tom could feel it flowing through him, as if he was being scanned for any curses or magical maladies, or perhaps even magical artifacts that he should not have. This was an incredibly strange sensation, like something had cracked 6 eggs on his head and then poured them through his soul with a bit of butter. Sure, it came and went fairly quickly, but he was well aware that he had definitely gained a few residual spells stuck to the very core of his being, and he was fairly sure that he didn't like this one bit. It was likely necessary to keep them intact for the sake of being allowed entrance to Hogwarts, but he was 100% going to make sure that he went over them and removed the ones that weren't necessary as soon as he had the knowledge to do so. When they stopped at the bottom of a ledge before a set of stone stairs, a female professor with stereotypically Scottish red hair and a stern look stood before them, looking at them all with an appraising eye. After a moment or two, she raised an eyebrow, and with a flick of her wand created a more stable platform out of the water to help them out of the boats. "Come along, children. It won't last forever," she told them as Hagrid waved them all off. Once they were all on the shore, she gave the large man a nod, speaking to him directly while she had the chance. "Be sure to come back inside for dinner after you send the boats to the shed, Hagrid. We don't want to have to come find you at your fields again like last year." Hagrid nodded at her, helping the last few students out of their boats while the rest of them stood on the landing, watching the interaction with intrigue. "I'll be there as soon as I can, Professor McGonagall. I wouldn't miss the sorting ceremony for the world," he told her, puffing his chest out as she released the hold on her magic, since the students had all been received. "See to it that you don't," she sniffed, though there was a fond smile on her face as she turned to the students, ready to lead them inside. "First years, follow me. The sorting ceremony will begin shortly and I don't want any of you to be late." The fact that she said it in such a way implied that she had personally been there when a student or two actually managed to pull that off somehow, so Tom decided to ask about it. "Professor, has that actually happened before in Hogwarts?" he asked with the sort of blunt curiosity expected of a child his current age. If it did, there must have been something holding them back, right? McGonagall blushed a little at the thought, clearing her throat as she began to lead them inside. "Well, we were all young once, and it was only by a couple of minutes, but it was no less embarrassing for the experience, so I do not wish to inflict such things upon you." Her pace quickened as she brought them closer to a set of grand doors that seemed to twist and click, with the smooth operation of countless gears as they slowly unlocked for them to enter. Impressive as the sight was, Tom noted that without magic to back it up, having such a complex locking mechanism would only make it easier to break in, not harder. Though he assumed that most wizards probably didn't think of the simple solutions, like accelerating several tungsten rods at the walls and door themselves via non-magical means, until it gave in from the sheer kinetic force. As soon as the doors stopped clicking and began to open, a horde of ghosts came flying down out from within, chasing a rather persistent poltergeist, as he proceeded to fling various balls of glittering nonsense at people that seemed to be flow towards their robes and hair, as if guided by an unseen hand. Tom was smart enough to know that if he was to step too far away from the crowd, he would be absolutely covered, so he simply stood near the far side of the group and prepared to dodge the incoming sparkles. One never knew what seemingly magical sparkling dust might do to someone, even if it seemed relatively harmless. Case in point, most of the group started to sneeze violently, and their hair changed colour. With each sneeze, their hair started becoming more and more silvery. "Peeves! Get back here and stop spreading failed potion powders all over the poor students," one particularly pissed off ghost yelled with a deep and angry voice. The school seemed to tremble with his rage, or perhaps that was just him, but it really was a grim reminder that dangerous things sometimes happened within these halls. It is unbefitting of one allowed to live within these hallowed school grounds, no matter the reason. Peeves simply stuck his tongue out at them and laughed, flying off through the air to try pranking someone else again. The dark-haired young boy was not looking forwards to dealing with that in the future. In fact, he would probably look up ways to exorcise particularly nasty ghosts as soon as possible. Walking into the Great Hall, they found themselves greeted by the smiling faces of thousands of students, likely trying to see what the results of the prank that the poltergeist had played on them, while they still had the chance. Only a few of them were not covered in silver sparkles and had clean robes and hair, causing the children to laugh uproariously, which made Tom glad he didn't end up among those who had been struck by them. Thankfully, their impromptu captive audience was silenced when the man in the middle of the head table, with the largest and most well-kept beard he had ever seen, stood and clapped his hands softly. The echoing bang from his hand sounded almost like a thunderclap, despite how gentle a motion it had seemed. Tom knew by now that it was due to some sort of spell or such to amplify its volume, but the old man didn't need to raise his wand for such a thing, nor even so much as speak a single muttered spell by the look of things. He recognised the old man as the headmaster of Hogwarts, Professor Dumbledore, at a glance, the manipulative old fool who liked to gaslight children into thinking that they needed to die so that others may live. Tom shuddered. He might be able to respect the man's choice of beard, but that was about the only thing he could respect from someone so utterly willing to send him off to die against a fated adversary of his chosen child, if only so that his beloved Britain would never change. Still, his wandless and wordless magic was pretty impressive. How much had the headmaster practiced to be able to do such a spell so well, without the need for any indication that he was using such a spell? Probably a very long time. After all, he was very old, and most certainly had the time to figure out such things for even a spell that seemed so utterly trivial, yet so very useful. That spawned another stray thought for him while the old man began to talk, likely welcoming them to the school and introducing himself as they spoke. How often had he dreamed of being able to do all of his magic wandlessly and wordlessly? Perhaps he might have some insight on what he needed to train in to achieve such things. It would be remiss of him not to at least try to milk the professors in the school for every last scrap of knowledge they contained. He might have to check with Professor Snape after the feast so he could ask the potions teacher if Dumbledore would be a good teacher for such things, or if he should simply ask someone else in the school. Tom sighed. He was getting ahead of himself. Perhaps there would be books on the subject he could try first. There was a lot less risk involved in that than there was in asking for help directly after all. It would be rather foolish to not try on his own first to see if he could figure everything out properly and not have to worry about it. At some point, Professor McGonagall had moved her way to the front of the room, her voice calling out to the children with her own amplification spell. It was just loud enough to allow everyone in the hall to hear her without raising her voice. "We will now begin the sorting," she called, bringing him from his thoughts as they were slowly sorted one by one. There were exactly 2 people he was interested in hearing the sorting of. Both of them would be sorted long after him, so he was quick to calm his racing mind and steady himself for what might just be the most invasive sorting process he would ever experience. As soon as he heard his name, however, he nearly jumped out of his skin. But he managed to recover in time to walk down between the 2 middle rows, the stares of the many children within causing the hairs on the back of his neck to raise ever so slightly in response. Once he had been seated on the small stool in front of all the children at once, he had the hat placed on his head and hoped for the best. It was a magical artifact that read minds after all, so who knew what kinds of nefarious things were placed into it as enchantments? The hat might even have to tell people all the knowledge locked away in his mind. "Oh, come off it now. I'm both legally and magically obliged not to do that," a voice spoke up from his mind with an almost offended tone. Even if I would love to tell Dumbledore his plan to put Harry and the Dursleys resulted in nothing but pain for him, I'm literally bound by the magic of the school not to divulge secrets even if I wanted to. The hat paused for a moment before considering its next words carefully. If you were to make it no longer a secret, however, that would be most helpful, as I doubt that the old fool truly saw it coming when he placed the child there, especially not in his slight senility. Tom glanced up at the hat with a slight mental groan, knowing that everything he had ever known was within the hat's grasp. And what if I don't want to be exposed as a reincarnator, he asked in his mind, allowing the hat time to respond. Bah! It's all the same with you lot, it claimed, as if it had experienced this many times before. You're not as special as you think. At least 4 of you pass through these halls every decade, and not one of the ones I've sorted were willing to share what they had learned, nor who they were before. The hat grumbled for a bit about time-travelling bastards and a stupid multiversal goddess of foxes, limiting the capabilities he was given in some Faustian bargain before it continued. Well, since I can't very well sort you based on your past life, I only have your current one to judge you on. Then what can you judge my suited house on? Tom asked with a twitch of his eyebrows. It was fairly obvious to him immediately after he said it mentally, but his mind was very much in turmoil about having it be so exposed to a magical artifact he did not truly trust. Well, I can see based on your loyalty to those who earn your trust and endearment, and your steadfast belief in the value of hard work and getting things done that you'd make an excellent Hufflepuff above all else, so unless you have any objections. The hat offered him to pick any alternatives he may desire, but Tom knew full well that he would at least know one person in Hufflepuff, so it wouldn't be too bad. It would likely also help him blend in and avoid unnecessary trouble while he was at Hogwarts. Well then, it seems your choice is made. Then it better be Hufflepuff, the hat told him, exclaiming the last part aloud for the whole school to hear. Many of the children at the table adorned in yellow clapped and cheered, calling him down with bright and warm smiles. Once the rest of them had been sorted, with Tonks joining him in Hufflepuff and Charlie joining his older brother in Gryffindor, Tom decided to sit quietly in his seat, the shape-shifting young girl joining him at the table with a smile. The students were congratulated on being sorted into their houses fully as they sat together surprisingly comfortably, despite what you might expect from hard wooden benches, and waited for their first meal at Hogwarts. Dumbledore stood one last time as soon as everyone was settled, and began to speak. And now for the Hogwarts song. Feel free to sing it to any tune your heart desires, so that perhaps we might hear the music of youth, he told them, before waving his wand into the air, filling it with various lyrics for the entire school to sing. Chaos erupted soon after in a cacophony of sound, the students trying their very best to sing over top absolutely everyone else in the school, no matter where they were. Needless to say, he wasn't enthused. However, once Tonks joined in and started singing to the tune of a Black Sabbath song, he knew he would have to join in. If only because he recognised it instantly from his father's old vinyl records from when he was a child. When the surprisingly fun bit of so-called music was over, he found himself with a small smile, and decided it probably wouldn't be too bad in the school. After all, nothing terribly bad happened during this time period as far as he was aware, at least until after he would be done schooling, and he likely wouldn't need to get involved with any major tomfoolery himself. On top of this, magic was pretty interesting as an idea, and he could see himself making worthwhile friends and allies while he was at the school, potentially. His thoughts were interrupted by the last part of the old man's speech before they ate. Of course, do not venture into the rather aptly named Forbidden Forest without a teacher, as you will in fact find out why it has been named such rather shortly, he told them with a sigh, as if he had seen far too many morons enter there unprepared. So unless you wish to die a rather painful death, I assure you that you will find nothing your hearts may desire within such a dreadful place. Now for a few final words before we begin our meal, he said, growing a cheeky smile as he continued. He looked as if he was about to tell the students the greatest joke in the world, though Tom sincerely doubted it would be. Endings, death, goodbyes, enjoy your meal. It was at that point that Tom noticed that an absolutely massive meal had been laid out before them without him noticing. It reminded him of the house elves, who would indeed be incredibly useful to him, should he manage to acquire one or two for himself. He would have to look into such things as soon as he could, but preferably after he ate his fill of the meal and had time to study a bit more about wizarding culture in general. The meal lasted quite some time, but when it was over, Professor McGonagall directed them all to follow their prefects so that they would not get lost along the way to their dorms, and declared that their head of house would be by in the morning with their schedules for the next semester. "All right, follow me, kids. Let's get you all tucked into bed," a rather plump woman with a cheery smile called out from the end of the table, already eager to lead them to their dorms despite most of the heads of houses leaving that duty to the prefects. With that, the group was gathered together and they all followed her as she began to chat with them. "My name is Professor Pomona Sprout. I will be your head of house and your herbology teacher while you are here in Hogwarts," she called out, her voice filled with excitement for a new year. "I hope you will all come to enjoy what this school has to offer as much as I have." After following her through the ever-shifting maze of staircases and hallways, warning them of tricks and traps along the way, she came to a stop outside a set of wine barrels. "Unlike the other houses, our house dorm has no password to get in. Instead, you must knock on the barrel that is 2 from the bottom, in the middle of the second row, in the pattern of Helga Hufflepuff to get in," she told them, demonstrating it as she went, the barrel opening for them to crawl through. "After that, you simply enter right in through the barrel and you'll be in the common area, or as I like to call it, the den. Home Sweet Home 06. First day of school, room of requirement, and hunting the basilisk. Waking up in the Hufflepuff dorms for the first time was an experience. The warmth of the crackling fireplace in the room and the fluffiness of the furry blankets they had provided him tempted him to fall right back asleep. At least if not for one of the other students poking him in the arm, even going so far as to shake him a little to wake him up for breakfast. He was somewhat glad they did, because he didn't want to miss his first day of classes for the world. It was absolutely imperative that he show up on time and make a good impression on both Professor Flitwick and Professor Snape, because they had much to teach, and he had much to learn. Professor Flitwick was a master at many styles of duelling from all across the world, and Professor Snape was the most distinguished potion master from Britain in the modern age. Tom would be a fool not to make use of such amazing teachers, no matter what he thought of them from the books or his personal experiences from the real world. Besides, Snape seemed much more likeable than his canon book counterpart, and he had yet to talk with Flitwick, so he most definitely needed to temper his immediate reactions to, and expectations of them for, his future interactions. It would be better to get to know them properly first, after all. As soon as he was up, showered and dressed, he made his way down to the Hufflepuff common room. The low ceiling he previously hadn't paid much mind to seemed to shift with each passerby, allowing them to stand to full height, while still allowing the various plants hanging above to help brush and comb their hair for them while they walked. Various cacti danced and waved in the sunny, brightly coloured room as the students passed them by. Even the various rugs and furs seemed to have a special charm on them that made them extremely comfortable to lay on, especially when there were no couches or high tables to sit at to do your work on at that moment. The dorms were not separated by year or by gender, but rather each student got a full-sized bed for themselves and special privacy curtains they could pull around it that let out no sound or light, so that everyone could sleep peacefully even while feeling a sense of camaraderie and belonging. It was a veritable paradise for those who happened to enjoy any sort of socialization and friendship. And the fact that they had fresh mugs of coffee, tea, and surprisingly butterbeer for the morning set out with plates of donuts and breakfast wraps, made Tom wonder how the house wasn't filled with morbidly obese children by the end of each year. Still, he was quick to grab himself a coffee and a donut, as they had about half an hour before Professor Sprout came to guide them back to the Great Hall for breakfast. After that, they would be off to start their classes, well, at least he would have more time to read a few chapters from his potions textbook. That would help a lot for the coming day. Charms class was the first class of the day, and it had started with a bang, quite literally in fact, when they were told to make the end of their wands glow with a simple light charm. One of the students managed to overpower their wand so much that it actually exploded in his hands. Of course, Tom was still recovering from being right next to that when Professor Flitwick called for the resident healer to come check them over for any injuries. It only took a few moments in his mind for her to arrive and begin to check them all over. She declared that besides the person whose wand literally exploded in their hands, they would all recover on their own in a few minutes, at least provided no one else decided to dump the entirety of their daily magic capacity into a light spell in an attempt to use a wand that was both poorly maintained and unsuited to them. The poor Slytherin boy looked thoroughly embarrassed, as if he had been shamed to the greatest degree he had ever been in his life, or if his ancestors were looking down on him with disgust. He didn't seem too terribly injured himself either, having all of the splinters removed from his hand in moments, along with some healing salve placed on it with a bandage for the day. "I don't know what you were thinking using your grandfather's wand, especially not in that condition, Mr. Macmillan, but such things are not good for your continued health and well-being," Madame Pomfrey told him with a sharp glare. It was her duty to make sure students didn't injure themselves permanently while practicing magic within Hogwarts, so it was within her rights to be stern and angry with him. "Sorry, Miss Pomfrey, it won't happen again," the boy told her with a groan, clearly having learned his lesson about trying to force an uncooperative wand to work for him. Tom knew he had learned something valuable that day himself. He would need to be careful when he looked for a new wand for himself to get around the magical tracing they must be capable of. "I would hope not. If you manage to do such a thing a second time with a proper wand, then something is seriously wrong, and we would need to find out what managed to curse you on your first day at Hogwarts," Madame Pomfrey told the poor boy, her voice only slightly lowered in volume compared to before. Her greying hair seemed to get just that much more grey as she looked over him, but eventually she gave him a pass to leave the school for a new wand and decided everyone else was fit to carry on with the lesson. "The rest of them should be fine to continue, Felius," she told the half-goblin teacher with a smile, tapping her wand against her thigh as she stood before his desk with cocked hips. "Just be careful not to cause permanent damage by demonstrating an overly bright Lumus Maximus in the class so soon after the last attempt at magic, and they should be fine." "Very well then. Perhaps we should move on to something a little less traumatic while we recover," the old half-goblin asked with a cheery grin. He certainly seemed excitable and ready to teach at any moment. It was actually quite fun for Tom. For the rest of the class that day, Professor Flitwick had the first years practicing making a feather float above their desk. Professor Snape was an interesting teacher. His method of teaching seemed harsh at first glance, but it really was necessary. "And tell me, Mr. Harry, what is the common name of the potion called Felix Felicis, and 2 ingredients involved in its making?" he asked with a small smirk, as if he had full confidence that Tom would be able to answer it. The young boy nodded and began to recite what he knew from memory. "Finely ground gold dust and vodka help make the common variant of the luck potion. There is a more potent version, but the ingredients are regulated harshly, and the full-strength version is a banned substance in Britain." Once he was done, Snape looked at him with appraising eyes, an eyebrow raised to show how impressed he was. "Very good, Mr. Harry. 10 points to Hufflepuff for actually reading the first year's recommended reading for the first week of school. Unlike some I can mention," he looked around the classroom, a dark expression on his face as he eyed the ones who couldn't even be bothered to read through the rather short section in the very beginning of their book that would tell them everything he needed to know for what Snape would ask them. Honestly, it was a wonder that any of them had managed to even find the classroom, as the Gryffindor students that had been assigned to the same time slot as them for that class were very much not willing to do the required amount of reading, something that would have taken the average child 15 minutes at the absolute most. It almost made him wonder if any of them had ever gone to a non-magical school in their lives, or so much as picked up a proper book before coming to the school, because that was kind of ridiculous. At the very least, however, the rest of the potions class was mostly uneventful, due to him being paired with the most idiotic and lazy of the group. He managed to simply force the boy to properly watch their measurements with the looming threat of their cauldrons exploding violently on them on their very first assignment, and how embarrassing that would be. Needless to say, the boy listened well, and they got through it just fine. He would definitely have preferred to be working with Charlie, however. The Weasleys seemed to have it well in hand, at least. Perhaps next time he could ask to join him instead. It might be worth a shot to at least try. Would certainly be better for his longevity. At least classes were done for the day, which meant it was time to find the most essential part of his plan, the room of requirement. 7th floor hallway, directly opposite of the tapestry of an idiot teaching trolls to dance, Tom noted to himself, as he walked back and forth in front of said tapestry, thinking strongly of his need to access the private study room of the main character from Hogwarts Legacy. A game he had played in his last life when he heard how Silvervale, his favourite VTuber, was nearly cancelled entirely simply for playing the game. He never understood why people gave the series such hate, going so far as to literally buy J.K. Rowling's books, paying massive amounts of money for multiple copies of special editions of her work, only to burn them all out of spite. The author was still making money off such things, and clearly didn't care how people treated their own property, because it was still making her money either way, but people were oddly insistent about it nonetheless. As a direct result, the game was treated as if it was the most evil thing in existence, despite having quite literally nothing to do with the author. People might have been right about her having political agendas or being a right bitch of a person towards quite a few different groups of people, but the way people treated her didn't help matters at all, and in fact, only helped spread the hate for the groups JK was so adamantly against. As he focused on his internal tangent, he noticed that the door to the room of requirement had appeared, so he headed in right away, only to come face to face with a debate club made entirely of old paintings that seemed to argue over things at exceedingly loud volumes. Needless to say, Tom sighed and left the room to begin pacing again. He realised from that incident that he would definitely need to have a clear image of what he wished from the room, lest it give him something that would only cause an annoyance or worse, a migraine. After calming his inner fanboy for the series and his old man sensibilities, Tom paced back and forth in the hallway yet again, keeping a clear image in his mind of what he absolutely needed the room to have. A room he could study in, that had all of the required tools and equipment needed to learn the various things he desired, and that held additional rooms within that had access to a reserve for magical beasts and a magical garden he could use for his own purposes, just like in Hogwarts Legacy. He would certainly need to populate it himself, he figured, but it would most definitely allow him the tools and equipment he needed to perform safe extraction of the materials he wished for. When the door next appeared, he opened it with an expectant grin, hoping it would be as interesting and filled out as he thought it would be. And yes, in fact, not only did it achieve that, it even exceeded his expectations. Just within the room of requirement was a study filled with various books and study materials for his perusal in what amounted to a massive library. It was well lit and filled with countless topics that he could choose from by calling for a book near the desk, which had the largest catalogue he had ever seen in either of his lives. Before he could get too caught up in that, he noticed a hallway connected to several doors, all of which were clearly labelled, and one of which specifically led to the room he wanted to check most, the storage room for all the automatically harvested ingredients. After a moment's hesitation, he opened the door to see the aisles of neatly stacked and organised boxes absolutely filled to the brim with all the magical reagents and ingredients he could have ever needed, all labelled and charmed with preservation spells so that they wouldn't go bad. It had everything, from harvested dittany, mallow-sweet and mandrake, knotgrass, Chinese chomping cabbage. The room had it all. He knew as he looked through the catalogue that all of the potion ingredients needed to make any of the potions taught at Hogwarts, and quite a few that most certainly were not, could be found within the room for him to use, and in such quantities that it would be hard to run out if he spent 1,000 years trying to go through all of it without receiving any more, let alone if the production continued at such a prodigious rate. That was not even getting into the sheer amount of magical creature ingredients that was available to him in those boxes. Puffskein fur, Fwooper feather, Graphorn horn, unicorn hair, toad warts, phoenix feathers. There was no end to the list of magical creature parts that had been harvested and preserved for him to make use of. With a bright smile, Tom laughed a little at his fortune. "This is insane. Absolute madness," he said, as he took in all the things he had available to him at that very moment. There was only one thing that he needed to check. Was there a time turner in the magical artifact room, or would he need to find another way to get one? He certainly hoped it would be available for him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to research occlumency from the books the school had to offer instead of the one he had purchased. Tom would have asked Professor Snape if the book was legitimate, but he decided to wait for a moment or two, simply because he felt as though he needed to provide some decent results in potions class before he asked for anything more from the man, to prove that he was worth helping out above all other students. He really wanted to get Snape on his side, if only so he could learn from such a high-level master at potion crafting and creation. It was the same thing that drove his desire to ask Professor Flitwick for extra lessons and more things to practice in his free time. He hoped that by doing so he could potentially find himself learning so much more from the reigning dueling champion of the world, one who remained undefeated according to the books he'd read, even in his old age. Plans he'd made were coming to fruition, and he needed to make sure that no one else could see his plans and adjust accordingly without him noticing. Which was why when he checked the artifact room and found that yes, it did have a time turner ready for him, as soon as he walked in the door he smiled even harder. There was no way that he wasn't going to make use of this. But first he would snag one of the magical automatically setting watches in the room, so that he could better keep track of time. It wouldn't do to have a time turner and use it frequently, only to accidentally run into himself in the washroom now, would it? After using the time turner to make the most use of his time reading the books in the room of requirement all day, Tom realised that he was tired and hungry, and that he should probably get something to drink before he passed out from dehydration during class. Considering his dorms were just down the hall from the Hogwarts kitchens, and he already knew how to get in, he made his way down to them, tickling the pair for entry into the most delicious-smelling room in the castle. Immediately upon entry he was beset upon by worried house elves, all of whom were extremely distressed at how little care he had shown for his own health and well-being. "Young Master Tom, we was worried sick about yous. We saws you working all day with no drinks or snacks, but Wes couldn't come unless called," the poor head house elf cried at Tom while they worked to offer him food and drink, until he legitimately felt like he was going to be sick from overeating. "Sorry, my bad, but I can't keep eating and drinking right now. If I eat any more, I'll definitely get sick," he told them with a light groan. At least at that point they seemed to realise he was full and stopped, however. "Sorry, young Master Tom. Wes just were worried about yous a lot," the main elf claimed. It was quite clear that they cared this much about literally everyone in the castle, which was quite interesting in his eyes, though he did have one question that would likely help him immensely in his quest before the end of the day. "So, if I was to call for you, what kinds of things can I call you for?" he asked with an easy grin, the interest in his eyes plain to see for all the elves. "Well, as long as it won't cause any harm to the students or staffs, we's will bring you things that can help yous in your tasks, clean up after yous, and even tell yous of places out of the way to study and trains." "Well, that's pretty good to know," Tom responded thoughtfully. "What about potentially doing a bit of buying and selling of potions and ingredients, along with some magical artifacts in my stead? Can you do that discreetly without letting anyone know?" he asked with a curious gaze, his mind wandering to the various things stored in the room of requirement. The house elves shook their head, knowing that it was not something they could do based on their contract. "You needs a personal house elf for that, young Master Tom. We can't help with things that aren't related to Hogwarts, and we can't keep it a secret." It was rather unfortunate, but it looked as though he would need to properly find himself a house elf for hire. "Very well then. And how would I go about acquiring a house elf of my own?" Tom asked, his gaze never shifting from the rather helpful little elf. If he could have one of them, he could achieve quite a lot more in his daily tasks. Blinking, the house elf seemed to collect itself for a moment before telling him exactly what he wanted to know. It likely wasn't something that came up often based on its reaction. "All you's got to do is ask Headmaster Dumbledore if you wants to buys the contracts. When you finds one that's willing, that is." Tom took note that while it didn't seem offended, there might be a bit more to the contract than he initially thought. It was almost as if such a thing was considered a major undertaking, based on how the elf seemed extremely surprised by it. Perhaps the house elf was even a little put off. As he thought about how he would go approaching the house elves about the prospect of working for him despite this, Tom noticed something odd, and felt a wave of slight disgust fill his entire being. "Is that one using his feet to tenderize the meat for tonight's dinner?" he asked the head elf with a groan. "Yes, that's how's we does it here. Why?" the head elf asked with a strange expression, as if she had no idea what to make of his question. It was clear to Tom that he'd need to explain this gently, so as to not cause any problems. "Can you make sure that any of the food I receive does not touch feet at all? It's just a personal preference of mine," Tom requested as politely as he could, his eye twitching from the sheer lack of proper hygiene involved in such a practice. "Of course, young Master Tom. We'll set some asides for yous then." The head house elf nodded rapidly, its long ears flapping wildly as they all stared at him with their big bulbous eyes. They seemed rather enthused that they were getting a special request for dinners from one of the students, even if, or perhaps because, it made more work for them. Tom nodded in return, his blue eyes scanning around the room to make sure everything else was properly made instead of being mishandled in such a way. "Thanks, I really appreciate it," he told them after a moment, meaning every last word. "Yous don't have to thanks us," one cried from the corner of the room, with all of the others seeming to join in right after. It took him another half an hour to convince them that he was only being polite as that was how he was raised, and that he wanted to keep doing it without them feeling bad about it. After all, didn't hard work deserve praise? Upon exiting the Hogwarts kitchens for the night, Tom began to wonder about the basilisk. It was an extremely dangerous foe, one that could move throughout the castle with ease despite its massive size. It could get through the castle, where he had seen no pipe entrances at any point for it to get in and out of with no real effort, and hid from the various staff members without issue. A basilisk. The giant fucking murder snake that could and would kill you just by looking at you. The thing must have had secret invisible doors to get through, since even if the pipes could enlarge themselves, there were no clear entrances and exits anywhere in the castle. Yeah, nope, that thing needed to die, right the fuck now. Ducking back into the kitchen for a moment, he put aside his immediate distaste for asking for any form of help, and with a groan, did just that. "Hey, can I get a live rooster to kill the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets with? It's kind of important to the safety and well-being of the students," he asked with a pained and somewhat tired expression. "I was waiting for someone to ask that of us for a long time," a distinguished voice called out from the shadows of the kitchen. Stepping into the light, a house elf with a magnificently trimmed goatee smirked, making his way closer to speak with Tom directly. "We couldn't act without permission, you see, but such a thing is quite simple for us to take care of on your behalf, if you would ask for it," he articulated politely, but with a strong sense of pride in his eloquence written plainly on his face. "All right, can you go kill the basilisk for me?" Tom asked with a small yawn. "It's for the safety of the students, and the materials that can be gathered." "Of course, young Master Tom," the house elf grinned at him with a bow. "Consider it done. Just bring the materials up to the room of requirement when you're done killing and rendering it, I guess," Tom asked, not truly certain what to make of the house elf. Well, to be honest with himself, if the house elf was willing to help, why not make use of it? "All right, I'll be off to bed if you'll do that then," Tom sighed, hoping that this would work out just fine in the end. "I'll check the room of requirement in the morning to see if I can use any of it right away. Maybe the skin." The house elf nodded to him with a small smile. It was quite interesting to see the tiny being trying his best to help in his own way. "It would be fine to use the skin, but you shouldn't play with the venom until at least 3rd year. That's when you start needing such things for potions in any case, young Master Tom." "What can I call you?" Tom asked, deciding he'd like to talk with this one a bit more in the future. It was only natural to be interested in seemingly the one house elf that spoke properly in the castle. "You can call me Larry," he told Tom with a grin. "I'll be seeing you as soon as you call for me, young Master Tom." Tom smiled in return, yawning lightly as he turned to leave. "All right. Good night." Within the hour, Tom had made his way back to his room, and after a quick shower, got in his bed and drifted off to sleep. Perhaps he should make time to nap during his time-turner sessions, in order to avoid crashing as easily, but he would consider that fully once he was rested. After all, he had been awake for possibly an entire extra day despite the need to rest. Maybe it would be a good idea to take naps using the time-turner as well. Home Sweet Home 07, or that time Kitsu learned it wasn't supposed to be normal to drink coffee before 16 years old. Oops. "Oi! You're going to be late for breakfast," one of the students called out to him, shaking him awake for classes. It was the morning after he had asked for the basilisk to be killed and rendered, and Tom was feeling rather tired from the lack of a proper sleep schedule. "All right, I'm coming," Tom told the boy with a sigh. He had not received enough sleep to be ready for the day, and it certainly showed in his sluggishness. "Just give me a minute to get dressed." If it wasn't for the fact that he couldn't just use the time turner right in front of the boy to turn back time and sleep some more, he likely would have done just that. but for now he resolved to split off from him and get slightly lost on the staircases so he could go to the 7th floor and take a nap there instead for a few hours. After all, if he timed it just right, it would simply appear as if he had accidentally missed the timing on the moving staircases and ended up in the wrong part of the castle for a moment or two. "All right, I'll be waiting outside, so hurry up," the blonde-haired boy told him with a bit of urgency. Tom didn't know what he was so excited for, as Hogwarts food really wasn't all it was hyped up to be in the books. But he figured that the boy was English-born and raised, and likely had never tasted anything actually decent. At least not beyond what was well known and memmed about as average British food in the reincarnator's past life. Still, he should at least try to talk with the boy a little. Who knew what he had to offer for ideas after all? Plus he did look quite familiar for some reason, but he couldn't quite put his finger on why that was. Tom decided he would have to check in with him and see what he could figure out about the friendly and somewhat helpful boy. Once he was dressed, he made his way over to the door and greeted the boy outside. "Morning. Thanks for waking me up," Tom thanked him with a sheepish grin, allowing the plants to fix his hair for him as they moved through the common room. "No problem, mate. Just doing my best for an old roommate," the boy told him, returning the grin with one of his own. "Oh, well, that was certainly interesting." "I didn't catch your name yet, by the way. I'm Tom," the dark-haired boy told him, committing the mousy features of the blonde-haired boy to memory as he tried to remember where he had met him before. There was a place he could think of, but the boy would have to have an incredible memory to have been able to remember him, so it couldn't have been there. "It's me, Jimmy. I was the one who you helped with schoolwork back in the orphanage a lot and taught those memory games," he exclaimed happily. "It turns out if you focus on your magic while you do those, it really helps to remember important stuff, so I got ahead in school just like you did after you left." Wait, what? Tom vaguely remembered what he was talking about, but he certainly hadn't noticed any major increases in his memory capacity from playing memory games. Was it because he didn't know how to control his magic at the time? Could this be the potential answer to the start of occlumency? Tom's eyes narrowed in thought. It seemed he had much to discuss with this one. "Oh? I honestly had no idea it could be used like that," Tom told him with a small smile as he followed him towards the stairs. "It really would have helped a lot to know that it could be used like that. Maybe we can share some tips sometime." Jimmy's eyes widened at that. It seemed that the thought that Tom hadn't intended for it to be used like that hadn't even crossed his mind. "Oh, wow! You didn't know that, and you still managed to get as far as you did? You must be a studying legend." "I worked really hard to get the marks I did, yes," Tom admitted. The conversation was mildly awkward so far, but it was also oddly pleasant to be able to reconnect with someone from the orphanage. He would need to call in during the summer to see if he could organise a bit of something for them to do together, perhaps. "Well, I'm glad I got over my rivalry with you back at the orphanage now, because if I needed all that extra boost from magic just to catch up to your normal, I can only imagine what it would be like to try to compete with you once you figure out how to use that trick yourself," the small blonde said to him with a bright smile. They were closing in on the stairs, however, so he took a left turn instead of a right at the stairwell and rode the staircase up towards the 7th floor while the boy wasn't looking directly at him. He felt somewhat bad about it, but if he timed it right, he should be able to simply state that he got on the wrong staircase and ended up on a floor that was higher up by mistake. After all, he did just point out that his memory wasn't as good as Jimmy's, right? The boy probably wouldn't think anything of it this time, and hopefully there wouldn't need to be a next time. Making his way over to the room of requirement with a sigh, he proceeded to pace in front of it again and went right into his secret base as soon as it opened. With a yawn and a groan, he made his way to the first nap room and flopped onto a bed, turning back time with his time turner to get an extra 4 hours of sleep. After setting his watch to go off about half an hour before he went to bed, Tom grinned and went to meet Morpheus in the land of dreams. With a ring from his watch and a strange magical zap, Tom awakened from his nap feeling very refreshed. He was quick to rush off to the attached shower room, grateful that it included all the necessary things to help him cleanse himself. With that in mind, he showered as he waited for his other self to walk in and take a nap in the other room. The room of requirement was quite useful to him so far. He was very glad that, unlike how it was seen in the books and movies, the door did not need to remain open while people were inside, and he could hide the entrance as soon as he wished simply by closing the door. Of course, this meant that if someone wished to find him specifically, the room of requirement would lead them right to him, unless he specified otherwise upon wishing for the door, and that if someone had need of the same facilities he was using, they could simply enter and take what they wished. However, as long as he was able to keep it a secret, neither of those things would be even the slightest issue. After all, there were more than enough resources to go around if needed, and he was planning to take several samples with him in an expanded trunk either way. It would make it much simpler to deal with, rather than trying to see if plants in other worlds had the right types of magical properties needed to achieve the same effects. He would be rather annoyed if he lost access to the things in this world that would be able to help him in the long run. How hard would it be to make a room of requirement of his own, and anchor it to an expanded trunk? He would have to find out as soon as he was able to. As it was, the other him had closed the door to the bedroom and gone to sleep by the time he was finished showering. So he made his way out the other door to get out of the room of requirement before he missed breakfast. Hopefully there would be some coffee and cream when he arrived, as he was in for a rather long day. He would need the energy if he was to survive the defense against the dark arts class of the day with the Ravenclaws, let alone care of magical creatures that afternoon with the Gryffindors. Making his way down the steps, he soon reached the Great Hall just in time for it to open for breakfast, the students all piling in at once with Jimmy looking at him like he had grown a second head. Right. He was able to tell he had showered and rested in the amount of time it took him to get down the stairs, because he had a rather good memory. Perhaps he could have waited to clean himself before coming down to meet him for breakfast, couldn't he? Well, I won't ask what spells you used to clean yourself up just yet, but I'm going to figure out how to do it, and then I'll share it with the others, Jimmy told him with a grin. That way, no one bothers you about it when they already know they can just come to me instead, and you can focus on more useful things to share with me later. Quite presumptuous of the kid, but Tom could recognise an attempt at good-natured bartering for resources when he saw it. All right, let me know when you've figured it out then, the dark-haired boy told him with a charming smile before making his way over to the Hufflepuff table to be seated for the morning meal. And coffee. Couldn't forget caffeinated beverages. When he arrived at the table, a familiar face from the train sat down on the other side of him from Jimmy. One he had almost thought was going to forget about him due to how busy she had been during the school day before. "Morning, Tom," Tonks said to him with a bright and cheery voice. "I see you've made another new friend." "Nice to meet you, I'm Jimmy. I knew him from way back," the mousy blonde told her with a small smile. Holding his hand out to her for a handshake, he patted Tom on the shoulder to show his apparent familiarity. "We've known each other since we were kids." Tom tried his best not to look uncomfortable at how close the two of them were getting to him, but they were crowding him from both sides and he felt rather cramped. It was almost suffocating to be forced between two extroverts, and he wasn't quite sure how to handle such a thing being shoved in his face all at once quite yet. Luckily for him, it was only a few moments later that breakfast was served. A very nice breakfast spread of fried bacon, scrambled eggs, ham and cheese omelettes, buttered biscuits of various types, sausage, bacon and assorted cut-up fruits, and bacon were available for all the students to take. While the meal from dinner time was bland and flavourless, filled almost entirely with grease, the breakfast was at least somewhat better, if only because that was exactly what one wanted from an English breakfast. The amount of energy one could gain from such a breakfast was ideal for a hard day studying or at work, though overindulging would definitely lead to diabetes. Tom wondered to himself idly about how the wizards of this society weren't all utter balls of lard with how much they ate, though. They must have some sort of ritual they did to make sure they would maintain their health, or maybe a potion of some sort. He would have to look into it when he was finished eating. With a smile, he subtly grasped the time turner in his pocket, knowing he had all the time in the world to achieve his plans, right at his fingertips. After all, it's not like a few hours here and there would be that noticeable on his aging that people would comment on it. Growth spurts were a thing, and he would simply have to claim it as such if people asked about it, and any questions would likely go away all on their own. "You listening, Tom?" Tonks asked as she looked at him with pinched brows, her annoyance written plainly on her face. It seemed Tom had missed something important during his inner monologue. Perhaps he should try to find a spell that let him record and play such things back for his own convenience in the future. It might just save his life one day. "Sorry, Tonks. Was busy thinking about the lack of coffee near us," Tom mentioned with a sigh. It really was a shame, to be honest, so it wasn't that much of a stretch. "You sure you want to drink coffee? It's so bitter," Tonks asked him with a mildly disgusted expression. She was clearly exaggerating it for comical effect, but it was still more cute than funny in his mind. Only a true working adult could understand his love for coffee after all. "Of course. Just add a little cream and sugar and it's quite tasty," he explained. "You can even add chocolate, vanilla or caramel to give it a bit of extra sweetness." "Are you sure? I don't think sugar can save that." Tonks looked over at the coffee near the 7th years warily. "It's kinda like lemonade," Tom explained with a grin. "You don't want to drink lemon juice straight, but if you add water and sugar, it becomes sweet and delicious." "All right then. Maybe I'll give it a go myself," she claimed. At that she laughed and brought some over with the levitation charm, along with some cream and sugar, one at a time. As she did this, Tonks looked over at Tom and smirked. "You should be able to do at least this much by now, Tom. It was in the list of things to practice that Professor Flitwick gave us," she told him with a sly grin, probably thinking he was just being silly for not doing so himself. And to be fair, he was just using that as an excuse for not paying attention, so he should have seen it coming. "Thanks, Tonks," he told her, the girl visibly preening as her hair turned a deep shade of reddish pink just for him. Once he had fixed up his coffee and taken a sip, he turned to her with a small smile and asked her about what she had said to him. "Now what was it that you had said before we were interrupted by my preferred choice of beverage?" Tonks perked up, grinning at him with a triumphant smile as if she had figured him out completely and was looking for a chance to show off. "I was asking what you were going to do for Quidditch and broom flying practice tomorrow. Jimmy said you'd figure it out in 20 seconds or less and then proceed to do laps around everyone else. But I told him that Quidditch doesn't seem like something you're into, so you probably wouldn't show off even if you could," she claimed, proving a startling amount of observational skills for an 11-year-old. "Yeah, I'm not sure I'd be any good at it though either, at least not at first," Tom calmly stated. He knew it was likely he would fail horribly the first few times, just like everyone else, and he didn't want to end up looking like a braggart. "It's not like I'm a genius after all, I just work very hard to keep myself at a good pace with my learning." The rest of the breakfast continued on without incident, and Tom found himself quite enjoying the company of the two children. They reminded him a lot of his own grandchildren, to be honest with himself, and he was quite happy to imagine what they might have thought of his new friends in his second life. He figured that they would get along rather well, most likely. Unfortunately, that was a thought for another time. He had work to do, and he couldn't let too many distractions get in the way. His maximum focus would be required if he wanted to get through the day, especially during Defense Against the Dark Arts. Tom might not know who was going to be the teacher that year, but he was certain that it would be an issue he would have to do his best to avoid. After all, wasn't the position quite literally cursed? He would need to watch for any red flags as he went about his day. Wouldn't be very fun to get caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, now would it? As the school year went by at a slow and steady pace, Tom was forced to realise that things were going a bit easier than he expected. It was almost suspicious how much money he had managed to acquire simply by providing some of the ingredients from the Room of Requirement to the house elves to sell amongst the students and staff, and how not one of them seemed to bat an eye about how he received such things. The dark-haired boy almost wondered why not even Snape had asked where the sudden influx of potions ingredients of all types was coming from, and why he was being paid so much for them, despite what he thought was a reasonable price being much, much lower than he was given. Sure, Tom certainly made use of what he'd learned about the subpar quality potion ingredients in Diagon Alley with Snape, but he had offered quite steep discounts to the staff and students as an incentive to buy from him. It wasn't as if he would lose on quantity after all, so he would turn a hefty profit from that alone. He definitely wasn't expecting the potions master to step in and force the students to pay him more. Again, he had no idea why this was happening, even if he knew how and what, but he wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. It would be rather stupid to try figuring it out at the stage it was at, and so he resolved to let that go for now. Well, he certainly wouldn't complain about the results, but he found it hard to believe that this was in any way sustainable. So he made sure to use the premium mail service to set up a personal account with Gringotts remotely, if only because of the fact that he would need a place to store the frankly ridiculous amount of money he had made thus far. He had every suspicion that it was simply because wizards in general had no idea what the concept of money was as a proper method of buying and selling goods, and that their ability to understand proper business sense was practically non-existent. Unfortunately, he didn't have any true knowledge of wizarding economy to base this knowledge off of, but this certainly seemed to be the case in his mind. As a direct result, he had more than enough cash to afford to invest heavily in the modern tech industry, all while still being able to afford a trip to America in the summer with the funds he had received by the end of Christmas break. And with that number only growing over time, his investments in the Muggle world through Gringotts, as well as more mundane banks through his father, were really starting to pay off. For the first time in this life, he had reached a point where he had more money than he could actually make use of, and he was rather pleased with himself for that fact. Now, if only he could make use of his status as a minor to not have to pay taxes and fees in the wizarding world as well, he would be very happy. Alas, not everything could go the way he wished. Thus he paid his taxes and continued about his day, wondering what the teachers thought of him as a student who had found success within their halls. "Larry, I need to ask you a favour," Tom called out one day within the room of requirement, as he browsed through row after row of expanded trunks, looking for ones with the best preservation charms he could find among them already built in. Such a thing might be utterly unnecessary due to the fact that everything he had gained from the room of requirement, along with all of the rendered basilisk parts, were already magically preserved, but it would certainly help for later purchases nonetheless. Of course, he knew by now that the house elf he called for would come as soon as his name was mentioned. Larry was always ready to help him, which was why he felt confident that he could sit in a cushioned chair and browse through the magical catalogues set out before him while he did so. It was much more comfortable than getting up to physically inspect them himself right away. "Of course," young Master Tom, the distinguished voice of the house elf, called out to him from a rafter above, before he appeared directly in front of Tom with a small grin. "What will you have me do for you today?" he asked, eager to begin his latest task. Tom nodded, folding his arms across his chest as he spoke. "I need you to find me any potions books with notes in them from someone known as the Half-Blood Prince. It is very important to me that this be done swiftly and silently, so that absolutely no one notices the search. I will arrange a team, and we will begin without delay. Is that everything?" Larry asked him with a small smile, his hands clasped in front of him like he was trying to beg Tom for more work. "Well, an egg and bacon sandwich with salt and mayo with a mug of coffee would be nice," Tom admitted, happy to provide the work-happy being with more things to do. It was very much something that was useful to him, and he was considering asking Larry himself if he would be willing to become his personal house elf. He could indeed simply buy some from a place that sold young ones. However, he was well aware that the Hogwarts house elf was likely the best one he could acquire. Unfortunately, the rules on buying house elves from Hogwarts were a bit stricter than buying them from most breeders. It was also consequently much cheaper to buy from Hogwarts, simply for the fact that almost no one wanted to buy a used house elf, at least not from a place that could afford to be so stringent and picky with their customers. "Right away, young Master Tom," the excited house elf exclaimed, popping away in an instant to deal with the tasks he'd been given. With how happy the elf seemed while working for him, Tom knew he would need to go through Hogwarts to find his house elves, if only because they seemed to be well taken care of here, and had already picked up the vast majority of the skills they would need to help him in his daily tasks, and thus did not require training of any sort. Within a few moments, Larry popped back up with his sandwich, along with a mug of coffee with sugar cubes and cream nearby for him to add it to his desired amount for the day. "How many cubes and splashes today, young Master Tom?" he asked, as he held the tray close for Tom to inspect with his magic. "3 cubes of sugar and 2 small splashes of cream, please," Tom told the house elf, as he took the sandwich from the plate. Taking a bite, he was filled with the satisfaction of a delicious sandwich, as he expected of Larry by this point. The house elf nodded his head and proceeded to expertly mix the ingredients into the coffee with his magic directly. It really was quite an impressive feat, even among other house elves, and it made sure that the coffee was mixed evenly, with no wasted sugar left at the bottom of the mug. "Very well, young Master Tom, here is your coffee," he told Tom with a smile. "Thank you, Larry." "That will be all," Tom told him, watching as the elf nodded and disappeared to do the rest of his tasks. Tom had long learned the most important lesson he could have about the creatures taking care of him at the castle. House elves were a necessity if he was to advance in life, and he would ensure that he acquired one that he liked, through whatever means he could use. If he didn't, he would be wasting a lot of time and effort better spent doing other things, and he only had so long to leave the world before he would be forced into a war he really didn't want. In any case, he had work to do. So, if I combine dragon blood with phoenix ashes... Home Sweet Home 08. The Teacher's Impressions. Year 1. In a stone room filled with the sound of a boiling cauldron, a dark-haired man with a slightly crooked nose stood over his work, adding in the pinch of fairy dust he would need for the current step of his potion crafting. This, along with many other such things, was one of the ingredients sold by the first-year student Tom Dick Harrison. He refused to call him by his original name despite what the Hogwarts quill had listed him as for magical purposes. His adopted family name was quite close enough either way, The boy did nothing to deserve to be treated as the butt of a joke due to his birth parents' unfortunate naming ability. He remembered well how he had come across a set of house elves working on selling ingredients to the students and asking them how they obtained such things. House elves were not known for wanting to obtain currency of their own, so he had reasonable suspicion that these were not in fact house elves of Hogwarts, and that one of his purebloods had decided to create a little side business for themselves. Upon his questioning, however, they mentioned that it was Tom, the Muggle-born orphan Hufflepuff, who was selling them, and that had gotten his immediate attention. He had seen firsthand the quality of that student's potions. It was something he expected of one using his own personal suppliers, but he had wondered if perhaps he had found another, someone he might have to keep an eye out for, if the quality of what he found was any indication. However, Severus Snape was not a man who asked pointless questions, not to those who knew how to use their resources wisely. It was not up to him to demand an inspection, nor to dig too deeply into the lives of his students. So, if Tom had managed to find himself a supplier of top-quality magical ingredients, one that wished to use him as their public face for selling mildly illegally gained goods, he wasn't going to snitch. He even approved of using his mind to find the resources and of selling them through an intermediary like the house elves. It showed that he understood proper risk management and was more than happy to delegate when the time called for it. You see, he wasn't like those utter imbeciles that prided themselves on working with their subpar materials simply because they were labelled as ethically sourced. No, he understood well the need for fresh ingredients that were utterly pristine in nature. For ingredients that were handled poorly or were past their prime usage date would most certainly affect the quality of whatever potions you were attempting to brew. This was why, when Tom began to sell such things for a ludicrously low price, he instead paid him the full value of what they were worth and thoroughly encouraged others to do the same. After all, if he decided he could sell them for a better price elsewhere, he most certainly would. He was the type to hunt a profit when he could see one, Snape could tell. And he could indeed respect such a thing. It meant that he had the drive, the willingness to make things some might normally be morally against. To hone his craft to such a degree that even he, a renowned potions master worldwide, was impressed by his hard work and dedication. Tom was no genius, no savant or intellectual superior of any kind. He didn't have the qualifications to be known as a game-changer for the world of potions at this very moment. What he did have, however, was the drive to improve, a hunger for knowledge far beyond those of his year, the willingness to work harder than anyone else to achieve his goals. Snape had heard many of his upperclassmen complaining about the fact that they had to take more and more detailed notes. This was simply because Tom would buy their old textbooks and notes from them to go over the things they had learned, along with the fact that he would pay a premium for those who truly broke down the steps and mistakes they had made, and how to avoid them or rectify them before things became explosive. As a result, his classes had become much less hazardous to the health and well-being of the students, and much less incidents occurred during class. Such a thing was a massive benefit for Snape as a teacher, as it meant much less time wasted cleaning up after dunderheaded mistakes, and much more time being able to actually teach. It also helped that many of the students had taken his example and had begun doing the same, whilst openly asking for criticism on their work, something he was all too happy to give, as it meant they were at least trying to improve despite their failings. If Snape was a lesser man, he would have been intimidated by the sheer single-minded pursuit of betterment. But he was well aware of how such thoughts wound up for him in his life so far, and he liked to think of himself as a better person than he was as a child, even if he knew he was still filled with bitter resentment from those years. However, Snape decided to keep an eye on this one. Perhaps he might just offer him a few more things to go over in his spare time, and maybe allocate an hour or two per week to extra classes for him. At least, if he wished to learn some of the more advanced techniques and potions a bit earlier, it would certainly be something to bring up before the summer break, at the very least. For now, though, he needed to work on his improvements to the luck potion. If he was able to create something slightly less addictive and toxic, it might be worth looking into. Now, where did he put that gold dust? This year had been wonderful so far. The students were so bright and full of energy. Why, it made Phileas feel as if he were 30 years younger again. There was even a young student, Tom Dick Harrison, and wasn't that a peculiar name, who was more than willing to practice spells with the upperclassmen and himself whenever they had the extra courses available. He hadn't skipped even a single one. Now Phileas Flitwick was not born yesterday. Tom most certainly had managed to get his hands on a time-turner somehow, but he seemed to be using it properly and responsibly, so the half-goblin wizard saw no need to turn him into the headmaster. After all, what harm was a little extra time in a day to learn all you could from Hogwarts while you were still young? Why, he had done much the same in his youth, and it led to him being known worldwide as the reigning dueling champion for almost his entire life afterwards. It was a real treat to see someone with such a passion for learning, and he was almost mildly upset that the boy hadn't been sorted into his house at the start of the year. However, just because he was a Hufflepuff through and through, especially with the amount of work he powered through every single day, didn't mean that Phileas was in any way going to hinder his growth. Quite the opposite, in fact. Tom had expressed interest in the dueling arena, and so he had requisitioned a time-turner for himself from the Ministry. He did this in order to spend just a little more time per week helping Tom learn the things he needed to, as well as setting up proper dueling opponents for him to practice against with supervision. Was it favouritism? Why yes, indeed it was. But any true teacher will tell you that there is no such thing as a teacher who does not at least have one favourite student of theirs that they worked with over the years. Teaching was an experience, a journey in which both the teacher and student come out the better for it in the end. To deny the act of enjoying the feeling of such was to call yourself out as someone unfit to be teaching the next generation of witches and wizards, especially at a place so well renowned, even famous, for their excellence and the quality of the teachings as Hogwarts was. Phileas just knew that Tom Dick Harrison would go far, and that was what he was planning to tell the others at the upcoming staff meeting. Hopefully Dumbledore would be a bit more, present this time. It would most certainly help if he could actually remember the details of the meetings after they were finished. But Phileas didn't hold his hopes out for it. The man still had much of his special pipe filler left for now, and Phileas wasn't entirely sure if it was actually the fault of the strange-smelling weed he smoked, or if he was simply getting old. However, he knew that his replacement would be much less fun to work with, so he simply didn't dare to comment on it. There was a good saying his parents used quite frequently that he applied to this religiously. It simply wasn't his business what other people imbibed, so long as they got their work done well enough, and so far that had been exactly the case. So, as a wise friend once told him, "It will be fine. Everything is fine." With that thought in mind, he made his way to the headmaster's office, making sure to apply the anti-smoke charm to his face as he did. It simply wouldn't do to breathe in too much of it, after all. A puff of calming, relaxing smoke. Another and another. A few brownies and some tea. Dumbledore was feeling as mellow as he wished to be in his office, while he listened to their teachers' reports for the last semester of the year. Inhale smoke, exhale smoke rings. He was quite happy to simply be. After all, his staff members were a capable bunch. Surely they could handle themselves well enough to take care of the students without him needing to micromanage their every move. The world wasn't chess, and the Wizarding War was already over, so Dumbledore had all the time in the world to simply let go and enjoy the moment. If only his companion Fawkes the Phoenix felt the same. "Dumbledore, this Tom," Professor McGonagall intoned, as if it was a mildly poisonous snake that she wished to avoid at all costs. "How can we be certain that he's not related to you-know-who?" "My dearest friend," Dumbledore began, taking another puff from his pipe and releasing it gently, "I will not judge someone simply based on their given name, no matter their talents." Apparently that was the right thing to say, as Minerva blushed furiously at her misstep. Clearly she had been letting her protectiveness over her house get away from her once again, and was worried that someone in the school was about to cause a bit of mischief. How unfortunate that she refused to partake in his calming draughts and special pipeweed. Such a wonderful invention that an American student of his had shared with him in celebration of the Dark Lord's defeat. He was quite happy to say that the barrel of product would last him for a great many years before he would need to restock. Just in time for young Harry to come to Hogwarts. Oh, how much he looked forwards to seeing the smiles on the faces of many in the years to come when the boy who lived, his own personal ward, came to enjoy the magic of the wizarding world. Such a thing would prove wonderful. He would be treated as a hero. Dumbledore was sure the child was being raised lovingly by his aunt and uncle. They were the type that seemed to indulge in luxuries from time to time, and enjoy spending time in the community with friends after all. And their own son would likely get along rather well with him, as that was how they were as a family. He received reports on them every week, though whenever he had the time to sit down to read them, some emergency or other happened at one of his various jobs, and by the time he was back to his office, he had already long forgotten. Dumbledore felt bad about it indeed, but he had faith that if it was urgent and pressing, one of his many agents situated around the area would tell him post-haste. After all, it was quite well known that he was rather fond of the boy, and that he wished him to be raised in a healthy, stable environment full of love and care. It seemed he was off on another tangent, however. He did not have the focus needed to continue the meeting for much longer, so he figured he should make a comment or two to let people know he was still awake. Let me know if this Tom is interested in having a little chat, Albus Dumbledore said with a grandfatherly smile. I would certainly love to hear his opinions on the school and Wizarding Society as a whole if he's willing. Such topics were all the rage when he was an impressionable young man. People from all ages would come together to discuss the various things they had discovered or learned at places of interest. Connections would be made, and bonds would be forged that would rarely ever be broken. He would not make the same mistakes he had made with Tom Riddle if he had any say in it. Dumbledore was ashamed to admit it, but a good portion of why Riddle had gone out of his way to become evil was because Dumbledore was too harsh on him, because he tried to restrict and control someone in the hopes that they wouldn't turn out like him, or his dear old lover Grindelwald. Unfortunately, Dumbledore knew all too well that it all could have been prevented, simply by introducing the poor boy to some proper companions, ones that would help him see value in life and happiness. No, he would not make that same mistake again. Instead, he would properly help the boy along the path he wished to take, and simply be there to advise him and pick him back up when he fell. It certainly would have helped him if he had someone willing to do such during those trying times. As such, he would ensure that the boy was in a better position than he was as a child. After all, the truly gifted needed special attention to ensure they did not accidentally misplace a part of their soul due to some ritual in a women's toilet, or something equally as ridiculous. A puff in, a smoke ring out. It's not like that had happened to any of his students before to his knowledge, so he had nothing to fear. Home, Sweet Home 09, Merchant Max Sing. The return trip home wasn't nearly as exciting as the ride to Hogwarts, not even close. However, Tom had found himself with two new people he would indeed call friends within his Hogwarts house, both Tonks and Jimmy. And while he avoided Bill and Charlie Weasley's escapades, by sheer value of not being willing to help them investigate their cursed vaults with them when asked, he wasn't estranged from them either. He simply made his stance known very clearly on what he needed to do to keep up his grades. That and his inability to keep up with all the things he wanted to do in a day if they tried to drag him off to investigate strange rumours. Tom simply didn't have the time to be sneaking out at odd times of the night, not to mess with things he simply wasn't interested in. That didn't mean he wasn't willing to play Quidditch with them during the day to help relax during free time, quite the opposite in fact. However, he was all too aware that letting the two of them know he had a time-turner to help with his daily tasks could only end in disaster. As it was, Tom was quite pleased that when he got off the train with all of them, his father and mother were there waiting for him with excitement, their eyes lighting up upon him exiting the magical train. It was a sign that they likely hadn't been brainwiped while he was away, and that he was going to be able to tell them all about his year once he got home. But first, a hug was in order. "It's good to see you too, Tom," his mother Ashley quietly told him, patting him on the back lightly as he tried his best to wrap his arms around both of his parents at once. He wasn't quite big enough to do so properly, but he was quite happy to simply enjoy their presence for now. It had been quite some time since he had properly had the time to do much of anything with them after all. Tom had been home for Christmas, but he still felt that several months was too long ago, and a good portion of the trip had been soured due to the actions of a particularly dumb asshole. Seriously, people did not understand what was and was not acceptable to scream out during a family corporate party with children in the group. "Well, shall we get to the car?" Jerry asked after a moment or two. He was right as well, because they would need to cross back into the Muggle side of the train station eventually, or else they would be trapped much further away from London than they would like to be for a while. The young boy nodded, letting them go as he grabbed his trunk again for the trip out of there. "Yeah, let's get going." With a set of bright, cheery smiles, the family set off into the non-magical world for the summer. "Hey Dad," Tom asked as they made their way back to the house. "Can we stop at Diagon Alley for a bit? I need to sell off some of my extra potions ingredients I got at school before they go bad." "Potions ingredients? Do you mean potion ingredients?" his mom asked from the seat beside him in the back of the car. She would normally be right as well, however. In modern wizarding culture, They call the subject of potion-making potions class, and the materials needed to make them potions ingredients. It's a lot like how Americans call the class that teaches maths math class, despite us calling it maths here in the UK, Tom explained gently, knowing that he was also tripped up by that when he first started reading into it a little in the potions textbooks. I forgot about that, Ashley groaned as she held her reddening cheeks. I'm so used to the mundane world that wizarding grammar atrocities no longer make sense to me. That's all right, Tom said with a small smile, patting his mother on the shoulder gently. It doesn't make much sense to me either. All right. We have a fair bit of time to go help you with that while we're out today, Jerry claimed with a grin, looking back at them via the internal rear-view mirror. Besides, I'm quite curious to find out what interesting things they have in magical stores. Ashley groaned. It's not that interesting. The only thing you'd even be able to enjoy is the food, and the doctor said not to overdo it with the sugar again or you could actually die. Too true, my love. But it would at least give me an idea of what things our son might want for mundane things. Things that could be useful to him while he's at Hogwarts, Jerry chuckled. After all, I'm sure there are a few things beyond just ballpoint pens and notebooks that Tom would want, even if he only complained the most about those things. Oh, a self-inking calligraphy pen might actually be allowed there, even if they don't like ballpoint pens that much. Mostly because those ones can use the magical ink that wizards like to use for runes as well, and the normal ink used in them doesn't interfere with magical error-checking methods, Ashley responded, getting a bit more into it. It was quite cute how his mother, despite having been basically disowned by her own family, was quite happy to talk about wizarding products. His mother wasn't a squib, not by a long shot, but her talents lay not with the wand, but rather specifically in the arts of potion making, magical cooking methods, and various other magical crafting techniques. It was quite fun to see her eyes light up when the thought of making anything, be it mundane or magical, was brought up in her presence. The reason she hadn't gone on to become a magical craftsman was due to the wizarding war that was going on at the time. People who weren't pure-blooded, who wished to exist within magical society, were killed in droves, executed on the street for the crime of living, and with her talents, should they have been discovered, she would have been one of the most prominent targets for a public lynching by the Death Eaters, all for the crime of having a non-magical grandparent. So with that in mind, she escaped to the mundane world and decided to live out her days making food for people, perfecting her craft so that no one who had tasted her food would wish her harm. It was almost perfect that he had her as a mother, and that his introduction to her life had caused a small ripple in the world he was now a part of. After all, if he wasn't a part of her family, Professor Snape would never have known she was there, and he would likely have had no true reason to help her, without making himself look suspicious to anyone who didn't know her. As it was, however, he was happy to take out the 2 shrunken, expanded trunks from within his pockets. Both of them were filled to the brim with preserved magical reagents and ingredients, so he could explain to her what he was hoping to sell, and to whom. In this trunk, I have several magically preserved wand cores, from phoenix feathers to unicorn hairs, dragon heartstrings, and even thestral hairs. Hell, there are even a bunch of thunderbird feathers in this one, Tom explained the first trunk with a smile. I plan to sell these to Mr. Ollivander if I can. Oh, and what about the potions ingredients? Ashley asked him with a knowing grin. She had quite possibly figured out that he was trying to distract them from what he was planning to sell, especially the stuff he wished to hawk to the new potion shop that Snape had recommended to him. Tom nodded, tapping the other trunk a bit nervously. He didn't know how his mother would take it after all. Well, those are a bit more dangerous, I won't lie, he told her with a serious expression. But the most dangerous of them was the basilisk venom, and that was handled with care by the house elves in Hogwarts, not me. Ashley grimaced, but she seemed to be mostly fine after hearing that it wasn't him that had been touching such a thing. We'll need to be extra careful with that trunk then. We don't want any of those things breaking in there and killing everyone who touches them. Is it really that toxic? Jerry asked from the front of the car as they pulled into the parking space, one reserved for mundane parents of wizarding children going to the leaky cauldron. They can't be letting children access such things in school at such a young age, can they? Well, Ashley visibly thought back to her time at Hogwarts, and wisely decided not to say anything. Unfortunately, the silence was just as damning as if she had mentioned any of the things she had to deal with when she was a student. The school was rather dangerous after all. Are we sure he has to be taught there? Jerry asked, mildly horrified at his realization. It was quite clear that he hadn't really thought about how dangerous magic was in general before, and it was rather bad timing to find that out. Yes, Dad. It is likely the safest magic school in the world as of right now, unfortunately, Tom told him with a grunt. It is actually safer than mundane schools in America right now, as long as you keep out of areas that you're clearly warned not to go into due to various restrictions placed on them for the safety of the students. Jerry sighed, exiting the car with a small frown. I don't see how having magical schooling will help you get further in life along the path you wanted to take. But I'm sure you have a plan, he said with a sigh after he opened the car door for them and let them out. At least, I hope you do. Tom nodded, pocketing his shrunken trunks yet again and taking their hands so he could guide his father through the leaky cauldron. I have more than one plan, with contingencies for each of them in case they fail, Dad, he told him, taking his parents through the pub and out to the alley with a smile. One of those things is attempting to make you stronger physically and immune to external magic cast on you. How would that be done? And why do I have a feeling that I'm going to be crying from a lack of common sense in my world sometime in the near future? Jerry asked, likely having a massive realization once more. Though he was certainly joking from his smile and his jovial tone, it was clear that he was still a little rattled from being told that magic was somewhat dangerous to be around, especially because both his wife and son were pretty much neck deep in the magical society at one point in their lives and were going to pull him into it as well. Well, you see... After a bit of an explanation that yes, rituals do exist, and that he was going to be learning about them in third year, his father, Jerry, was a little unsettled. Luckily, his mother Ashley had managed to calm him down by pointing out that it would be simple stuff at first, and that Tom would be very much set for life once he did learn about them, mostly due to how sought after and respected a wizard or witch who could conduct large-scale rituals was. With a bit of further encouragement that most rituals were not actually evil, nor even slightly satanic, they made their way over to the wand shop to speak with Garrick Ollivander. As soon as they opened the door, he smiled at Jerry in a knowing manner, as if he saw something amusing in the man's eyes. But he refused to give away the game just yet. "Ah, yes, it is good to see you, young Tom," Ollivander said with a small grin as he turned to face the boy. "I feel as though you have something you'd like to show me," he asked with a raised eyebrow. "I have time today for now until I close up shop." "All right. Take a look at these and tell me what you would offer for them," Tom told him, placing his trunk on the floor of the shop and unshrinking it. It was absolutely filled with various wand cores, and even a bit of wand wood that the Room of Requirement had extracted for him. The look in Garrick Ollivander's eyes sharpened. He looked Tom directly in the eyes, a hint of challenge there, before his expression softened. "I don't recommend going directly to the shops with things such as this in the future without having a known reputation, and the goblins would simply take it from you without giving you a fair price," he told the three of them with a sigh. "Instead, I'll sell the things you brought for you to some of my more frequent customers if you wish. I'll have the amount earned sent to your Gringotts account after taking a small commission, say 5%. "Why are you offering this if you aren't willing to buy it yourself?" Jerry asked, clearly unimpressed. "I'm offering this as a favour to your son because I want him to work with me as an apprentice during his second-year summer," Ollivander claimed with a small smile. "He has immense potential as a wand maker or an artificer, and I want to be there when he inevitably creates something utterly ridiculous." He paused to shake his head. "In fact, I bet he'll make something that becomes a daily necessity for the wizarding world one day." Tom nodded. It didn't seem like Ollivander was lying about this, and he had in fact mentioned it before he left for school, so he figured it would probably be okay to rely on him this one time. "I don't know if I'll be able to live up to your expectations, but if it helps us in the long run, I don't mind." "Very well. You might as well show me what else you have so we can set some prices for them together," Ollivander told him with a sigh. It would be best for Tom to do so, and he knew it, if only because he felt as though Ollivander would make sure he wasn't being ripped off, simply in order to make a good impression on the young boy and his parents. "Well, take a look," Tom said, opening the other trunk as well. There was a lot in it, so it would probably take them a while to go through it all. The man's look of shock was alarming. "This is—" What followed was a long discussion about the potential sale of basilisk eyes as reagents for staff focuses instead of as potions ingredients, and the benefits of having such a staff instead of a wand. With their sales trip dealt with, and the rather large amount of funds that they had gained via the sale of one of the basilisk eyes to Ollivander, the family decided to go to America for a summer vacation. It was only a quick trip, mostly to see how their investments were doing across the pond, and to visit Disneyland for a bit of family fun and bonding. Tom was almost excited at the prospect, as he had never been there before in his past life, and was quite sure that he would be able to gather some ideas from it, especially for more magical rides and attractions to introduce to the wizarding world when he had the chance. After all, Tom was fairly sure that most of wizarding Britain didn't have access to such things, so it would be quite a huge business opportunity. It was almost an entirely untapped market in that sense. In the meantime, though, they had managed to find a neat little mom-and-pop shop tour, one that allowed them to find all the most interesting little locally owned restaurants to dine at on their way through the USA. At one point, they stopped at the place where pizza was first made in the USA, and learned a little about how it was made traditionally while they ate a few slices. At another, they had chicken burgers at the first ever McDonald's to exist. They went from place to place searching for new flavours while they checked on their investments more directly, going to each company's headquarters to check in. It was a tour of culinary delights and corporate interests that Tom likely wouldn't forget for years to come. It was almost perfect. He couldn't wait to see the park and see what it had to offer them as well to finish off their incredibly fun trip. "Are you excited, Tom?" his mother asked with a small smile, knowing that he was almost on the edge of his seat in their rented car. Of course, he really should have expected his mother to notice. She was really quite observant. "Yes, I think it is going to be pretty great," Tom replied with a bright grin, happily enjoying the presence of his family. "There is a lot of cool things to see, and a few rides I think would be pretty fun to check out if we have the time." Unfortunately, as they arrived at the park, they noticed that there were quite a few construction and emergency vehicles around the area. Something must have gone horribly wrong. Why else would there be so many of them? Pulling up to the nearest parking spot to the front gates, the Harrison family walked over to check on what was going on. It looked as if there was a small amount of commotion, and Tom didn't know if he liked the look of things at all. "Sorry, but the park is closed due to the earthquake and ashfall causing a fair bit of damage. You'll have to come back next year," the park staff member claimed with a sigh. It was clear he had given the same answer to many people that day, which meant it was a fairly recent problem, and thus couldn't have actually been caused by a true natural disaster at that very moment, or they would have known about it on the way over. Tom grabbed his parents' hands as soon as he detected the magical barrier over the park and shook his head. They would not be coming back if this sort of thing was prone to happening there. It could be potentially far too dangerous for them. "It's all right, we'll just get a refund for our tickets later," Tom whispered to his parents. It just wasn't worth fighting over, and they needed to leave before they got caught up in anything they shouldn't be. After all, it would be incredibly bad if they caused an international incident because they died from being too nosy. It would certainly hurt his chances of finding a way to settle down in a safe world if he ended up reincarnating in a world like Mass Effect or Stargate. Tom didn't have any guarantee he would remember his past memories either, and he really liked his parents in this world. "All right, let's go back then," Jerry told them, and they did exactly that. Back to the hotel they went to prepare for the next day's itinerary. Home Sweet Home 10, a sweet summary / end of prologue part 2, August 1986. It was the start of a new school year, the beginning of another year that was absolutely packed with more knowledge for Tom to learn. His future looked bright, and the days soon to come were sure to be filled with things he was genuinely excited to know about. Things that would propel him to much greater heights than ever before. Speaking of achieving greater heights, the money he had received from selling the parts of the basilisk alone was enough that if he had decided to, he could legitimately buy his own castle, along with a noble title. And that wasn't even counting the rest of what he had sold. It was absolutely absurd how much money he was making, to be honest. He wasn't sure he was going to be able to spend it all, not without travelling the world to collect rare artifacts and books from all over the world for his own collection. The new trunk he had picked up from the luggage shop would also help with that a lot, especially since it came with a complimentary book, one on how to create expanded spaces and use them properly without causing it to collapse into a singularity, or end up making it cost more magic than he could maintain on his own, mostly because he didn't feel as though every world would have its own magic for him to siphon to power such things. As well as that, Ollivander had also taken it upon himself to teach both legilimency and occlumency to Tom over the first few years of his apprenticeship while they took breaks from wand and staff making, simply for the sake of him not accidentally leaking secrets. That would be extremely crucial when he went to places like Asia, lest he find himself trapped within the clutches of a hungry Gumiho, or some other such monstrous being. That meant that he was already able to detect when he was being scanned, as well as send false impressions and thoughts to them to hide his true intentions. He was actually quite talented at both aspects of that magic, able to grow in leaps and bounds with the mind arts, which incidentally allowed him to gain a bit of skill in the art of subterfuge. All he needed to do was check what someone was most likely to believe based on surface thoughts and the implied impressions thereof, and he would be able to misdirect all but the most stubborn of individuals away from whatever it was he didn't feel like telling them. Simple, yet rather effective. In fact, he was told that while the art was an ever-changing and evolving one, he would likely be far ahead of his peers by the time he graduated, and he hadn't even had a chance to use the time turner to practice such things. It was quite horrifying to him that he was so good at the one thing he feared most, but it was also strangely comforting that he would be more easily able to defend against it than others of a similar age, or at least with a similar amount of practice. "Ha! It's good to have money," Tom sighed, drawing the attention of the other occupants of the train car. "Now hopefully I don't run into anything that can disrupt my studies this year." Unfortunately, it was Hogwarts. Something was bound to go wrong, like the cursed ice, for example. That was something he had read about in his last life, but he didn't actually know when that was supposed to be happening, or how bad it truly was. He would simply have to be ready to avoid it, like everyone else in the school. Tom tried his best to be optimistic. It would be a pain if things didn't work out or if he got cursed, but he would do his best not to worry about it despite his inherent nature. He knew it would be really bad for his health if he worried about it, but the tightness in his chest just wouldn't go away. Unfortunate and scary, but it was a fact of life. Until he managed to get his family to a safe world, this feeling would probably come back repeatedly, forcing him to prepare himself as much as possible, lest he be worried until the end of time. And last year I heard that there are more cursed vaults that could be opened at any time, by any poor sap that happens to stumble across them like some sort of moron. Jimmy, the young boy from the orphanage, just claimed with a groan, and we all know the Weasleys are going to be neck-deep in it. Perhaps it was a good thing to be paranoid in the end. Maybe he should worry about things like this. It could save his life one day. Seriously. Hey, it's not Charlie and Bill's fault that they ran into such things. There's a conspiracy going on, Tonks argued in their favour. She was really quite passionate about it, and seemed to find the dangers within exciting. Perhaps Tom would have to be careful of her in the coming years. He didn't want to get cursed after all. Well, he would have to see how things worked out in the end. Maybe it would be okay. "I wonder what crazy thing they'll get up to this year," Jimmy asked. Tom tuned out the rest of the conversation, hoping the train ride would remain mostly peaceful until they arrived at the school. September 1986. Dumbledore didn't seem to be the most sober of individuals at the best of times, at least in Tom's mind. Why was this, one might ask? Well, it was rather simple. For some reason, over the past few weeks since school had started, the old headmaster had decided to question him lightly, attempting to guide him while manoeuvring people to keep him company more often. He wasn't entirely sure he had been found out for using time turners or the room of requirement, but he was beginning to feel as though he was reaching some sort of understanding with the man. Something entirely unrelated to those things. It was strange, curious even, but Tom felt as though the old headmaster was warming up to him day by day, until finally... "Tom, my boy, how would you like to learn the basics of alchemy from an old man like me?" Dumbledore asked him, his blue eyes shining as he peered down at the dark-haired young man with a grandfatherly smile. "If you can teach me without the use of cannabis, then I don't see why not," Tom told him, returning the smile with a genuine one of his own. The man may be old, he may indeed be senile, and he was certainly high off his ass, but Tom had heard stories about the types of things the man was capable of in his youth. If the old man could teach even half of what he knew, Tom would be a fool to dismiss it without trying to learn. "Of course, I will refrain from mind-altering substances when I'm teaching you, simply for your continued health," Dumbledore told him with a chuckle. "After all, I find my aim and reaction times are a little off when I'm smoking this magical medicine I've received from an old colleague, and we wouldn't want any accidents to occur." That made all too much sense to Tom. He could certainly see the magical weed having such effects, especially at higher doses. "Wait, hold on a minute. Aim?" "Of course, my boy," Dumbledore chuckled. "The first step to learning alchemy is battle transfiguration after all." Well, shit. This was going to be rough, he could already tell. At least he would be learning quite a lot of useful techniques. "Then, when do we start?" Tom asked with a tilt of his head. trying his best to hide his nervous sweat. "Whenever you are ready, my boy," Dumbledore grinned, nodding to the entrance of a corridor in his office that had not been there before. "Whenever you are ready." December 1986. It had been a harrowing experience so far. The school was affected by the ever-creeping presence of the ice from the 5th floor, which seemed to adapt to any attempts at removal near instantaneously. Be it through magical or mundane means, if one tried to get rid of the ice, it simply adapted and grew slightly faster. For obvious reasons, the classes in that part of the school were moved. Many students were given the option to house themselves at Hogsmeade, taking classes remotely instead of staying within the castle until they had sorted everything out. Something Tom wished he could make use of, but he needed access to the Room of Requirement to help continue his education. It was certainly a good thing that he managed to get the house elves to find the vanishing cabinet within the Room of Requirement that was purchasable for cheap. Thus, he would at the very least be able to access the resources that were contained within Hogwarts, even after he left to do other things. He would definitely need to learn how to make such things himself and how to connect to them across dimensions. It was the only way he could see himself being able to study the Room of Requirement enough to make a more portable one. Tom would need it once he got to the other world, as 6 years just wasn't enough time, even if he lived each day 3 times over, which he couldn't do if he wanted to remain hidden. There was a hard limit on how much he could do at Hogwarts. 1.5 days for every day would be looked at as if he was simply growing faster than his peers. Any more than that, and he would be immediately caught. That was a risk he did not want to take. Penalties for the apparent theft and misuse of a time-turner could get him a year in Azkaban, regardless of chronological age. After all, how would they be able to tell he hadn't turned of age while he was travelling through time, and he did not want to give his magical device up either? Not one bit! On the bright side, Tom had found something rather interesting to use as a ritual that the Room of Requirement showed him. One that would make him immune to any form of cold or ice. As the cursed ice crept closer to the room, it only required the blood of a basilisk, the heart of a dragon, and the crystallized tears of a Yuki Onna. All of which were simple to access, as he already had 2 of those things on hand, and the third was literally obtainable by mail order from a certain clan over in Japan. Needless to say, he was eager to get started on such a thing. After all, he was going to be meeting with them directly for a large purchase of some other things, so it wouldn't be hard to procure enough to do the ritual with during the winter break. Perhaps he could even find someone that would be willing to point him to where he could find himself a proper magical familiar while he was there. Something that could grow stronger with him while he was travelling the multiverse, maybe. As it was, he would simply have to survive the plane ride to Japan first. "I know you hate flying in planes, but we can't exactly fly to Japan on a broomstick with you," Ashley told him with a small grin. "Besides, aren't we going to Japan to find you a pretty girl or something?" "No, dear. We're going there to make a business deal with a gem manufacturing group," Jerry told his wife chidingly, a small smile on his face. "We need to keep in mind that our young boy is very much doing his best to create a legacy for himself before he makes that kind of legacy. We don't want to push him to getting a girlfriend too early after all." "You know what? You're right," his mother claimed with a sage-like nod, a teasing smile on her face as she tried to distract him from the flying metal death trap they were stuck within. "Just because we were childhood friends doesn't mean that every lasting relationship needs to be the same." At some point during their banter, Tom began to slowly relax and drift off to sleep. Summer 1987. With the way his ritual had worked on the bodies of him and his family, he was not surprised that intense heat tended to make him feel a little uncomfortable at this point. Within his veins flowed the very same cursed ice that was plaguing Hogwarts. His mother Ashley had helped him with that, which he was thankful for. It would adapt eventually, and allow him to withstand much greater temperatures, but its cursed nature was toned down quite a bit to make it compatible with a human host. His father, for example, was far more willing to test his limits. From eating burning hot food to bathing in literally boiling water, the man seemed to push the boundaries of his new physiology as much as possible to allow himself to keep up with the other 2, who had the ability to produce magic naturally. He was able to absorb and adapt to magic since then, but he still wanted to be able to prove he was at least physically capable of keeping up with the other 2, even if he wasn't able to actually cast magic of his own. It was something that was quite interesting to Tom, as Jerry seemed to make it a point to do his best to learn various martial arts so he could better protect his family. and to think all it took was the mere mention of potential Dark Lords that would wish them harm for him to jump on that faster than a tiger on a pig in India. Which was where they were currently learning healing magic and potions, all for the sake of any potential injuries they may obtain. After all, their blood was legitimately dangerous at this point and would likely kill anything that tried to imbibe it. Even getting it on the skin of someone that he did not want to kill was an absolute nope. It would be an excruciating way to die depending on where it splattered, and if they could remove the affected area in time. Well, I can safely say that while your father Jerry has no skill at casting any sort of spell on himself, he can safely imbibe potions and is able to heal himself, along with enhancing his strength, by concentrating his chakras into the affected area just fine, the healer in front of Tom told him with a patient smile. Wait, chakras? Tom asked with a confused expression. What is that? Those are the physical and spiritual chakra that he makes within his body as a result of coming into possession of a magical bloodline ability, yet not having magic, the man told him with a grin. The Asians call it something different, but here, the mental and physical energies of a non-magical warrior are called the chakras. Huh? Well, you learn something new every day, Tom supposed. It was almost time for dinner, however, and he was dreading what they were going to feed them that day. It was spicy curry night after all. October 1988. There was a certain sense of accomplishment one felt when they realized that they held the ticket to all the dark and dangerous magic rituals they could ever desire, in a cage under the draft of living death. It was even more poignant when he sent in a letter to Madame Bones, pointing out that Sirius Black had never stood trial and that he had the so-called Peter Pettigrew that had supposedly been killed by the notorious criminal and was given an Order of Merlin posthumously, locked up alive in a cage as a rat animagus, under potion to prove the man's innocence. Of course, that meant that within a week, Amelia Bones had him meet with her in her office, guided by a team of trusted auras, and it was discovered that he was indeed telling the truth. Once that was established, he was told to remain for the trial so he could testify. Will I be held accountable if he does something incredibly stupid as a result of having been locked up in Azkaban for so long without a trial? Tom asked with a grimace, not wanting to go anywhere near the man until he had seen a mind healer. Not particularly, no, Madame Bones told him with a look of disapproval. However, we're going to have to note you down on record as the one who saved his life in the end, and you are going to receive a reward from the Ministry, let alone Mr. Black. Leaning forwards a little, she gave him a small smile. Between you and me, it's better for you to be in the room with him so that he knows his saviour is watching over him. If I know him as well as I used to, he'll want to cling to you and use you as a guiding star for a while, so you'll have the best chance at putting him back together right. She patted him on the shoulder. You at least can't do worse than James. Was she implying what he thought she was? Damn. She was sneaky. But if it meant that he was legally approved to take advantage of the guy for helping him, well, he wasn't exactly going to say no. How hard could it be to hire a mind healer and just sit with him to talk when he needed it after all? If all he needed was advice, then Tom was pretty good at that. And if he needed a friend, well, Tom could do that too, he supposed. I guess I can make the attempt, Tom told her with a light grimace. It shouldn't be so hard as to make it impossible to help him, I think. After a moment he sighed. I make no promises that he will be in better shape than before his imprisonment in Azkaban, but I'll at least try to ensure he is capable of handling himself, if worse comes to worst. Amelia Bones nodded at him, rubbing her eyes lightly as she showed her appreciation with a small smile. Thank you. I am doing it because it's the right thing to do, not because I particularly enjoy it, Tom commented with a sigh, causing her to smile at him. Of course, this was the farthest thing from the truth, and they both knew it. But it would make her job easier if she didn't have legal reason to send people to watch over them. After all, he was well aware that if he specifically stated he intended to exploit Sirius Black, they would indeed be obligated to monitor him more closely, something that would make it take longer for the man to recover. He didn't want to deal with the consequences if the man went off the rails from being too closely watched, especially because he was well aware that the first thing Sirius was going to do was check on Harry at the Dursleys. Tom only hoped that Dumbledore wasn't going to stop teaching him private lessons on alchemy and battle transfiguration once he realised that he had freed Sirius. After all, the man was the one who witnessed the secret so it could be kept in canon, the one who casted the Fidelius ward, wasn't he? Halloween 1988. As soon as the trial was over, Tom was brought over to meet Sirius Black in the recovery wards of St. Mungo's. They were attempting to treat him for injuries, both physical and not, and he was being incredibly insistent on meeting the young boy who saved him from the cold, dark days in Azkaban, with soul-eating beings nearby at all times. Tom understood why, even if it made him want to tear his hair out at the fact that the man was already making death threats to the nurses, all because they told him he needed to rest and recover a bit longer before they could meet. It was only common sense that he would need to rest in the young boy's mind, but Sirius Black wanted to know who saved him and why, so he apparently needed to go explain himself to what was essentially an ungrateful man-child. From the impression he was given of the man, he would have to hold back his judgment a little, at least for now. It would look bad on him if he were to go in with the intentions to shut down any of his questions based on hearsay after all. When he arrived in the brightly lit room he was guided to by the healers, he found himself face to face with an anxious child in a man's body. He could instantly see that the man had been through so much and that he was looking for something, anything he could hold on to for just a tiny sliver of hope for the future. "Hey," Tom called softly, moving slowly into the room to take a seat across from his bed facing him. "My name is Tom. Tom, Dick, Harry." Yes, he did in fact say this deliberately. He figured Sirius would laugh at it and it would break the ice. Unfortunately, it also had the result of reminding the man of his godson. "Oh, my godson, Harry. I need to make sure Harry is all right," he panicked, and the nurses came in on the spot ready to sedate him. "It's going to be all right, Sirius," Tom told him gently, waving the nurses off with a calm countenance. "We'll go find Harry, but you need to stay calm." "Right," the distressed man began to take some deep breaths. "All right. Now, I'm going to ask the nurses to bring Dumbledore so we can go get Harry, but we need you to stay calm and keep taking deep breaths," the young boy told the much older man with a relaxed tone, allowing Sirius to centre himself by listening to the sound of his voice. Sirius nodded, following along just as he figured would happen. The man hadn't lost his rationality after all. He was just having a panic attack. "Okay, all right." After a moment or two, the nurses came back in with Dumbledore, who was once again high as a kite, and he was with an apparently underfed and shoddily dressed child, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old by the looks of it. Of course, the glasses and thunderbolt-shaped scar barely visible under his fringe told Tom all he needed to know. "Harry?" Sirius asked, as if afraid of the answer. "I was told if I came here I wouldn't have to go back to Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia," Harry shyly pleaded, as if he didn't quite believe the words himself. That was the wrong thing to say in that moment, as Sirius began to inhale a sharp breath. Luckily, Tom was on the ball, and as quickly and quietly as he could, he cast a quick sleeping spell on the man, catching him before he could hit the floor. "Sorry, he needs to speak with Dumbledore when you're not in the room, Harry," Tom grunted, doing his best to help the nurses put him back into the bed. "Because something tells me you are not supposed to be living with your aunt and uncle, and that they were a really bad fit." But I'm not normal, so I'm not sure that it was their fault," Harry tried to defend them, doing his best to not get into any trouble. "Oh God, it's worse than I thought," Tom muttered. "Can one of the nurses wake up Sirius once I've gotten Harry far enough away that he doesn't see or hear what's about to happen? Dumbledore should stay and talk it out with the man as much as possible, but I don't think—" "How could you? I trusted you," Sirius exclaimed, his voice loud enough for them to hear as he was awakened too early. "He should have never gone to the Dursleys. You know damn well that was stated in the will," Sirius roared at him with the most pained and aggrieved expression on his face. In the moment of shock Tom had experienced from this, Harry had taken it upon himself to sneak up on the poor man and pat him on the knee, causing Sirius to pick him up and hold him gently as though he could break at any moment. "Look at him, Dumbledore! They must have hardly fed him! He's so tiny!" At this point Dumbledore sighed and offered Sirius a strange-looking cigar while he took a moment to speak. "I cannot apologise enough for my actions, Sirius. My mind simply isn't what it used to be." "And what's this for?" Sirius asked, not entirely sure what to do with the thing. Dumbledore looked at him with a strangely serene expression on his face, one that seemed to make Sirius straighten up, his scraggly hair falling behind him as he looked at the man with an uneasy glare. "We are going to head back to my office and talk it all out. This will help the process immensely," the old headmaster told him in no uncertain terms. "Tom, you may bring Harry once you have waited for midnight, but should he be asleep by then, try not to wake him as you do," Dumbledore told him with a sigh. And then they were off, making their way towards the flue. Turning to Harry, Tom smiled. "Well, we have a few hours to burn while we wait for them. Why don't we see if we can get you some ice cream?" I've never had ice cream before, Harry breathed in awe. And that was probably the saddest thing he had heard all day. November 1988. Witnessing Sirius Black try to tear a completely stoned Dumbledore a new arsehole was amusing for all of 10 seconds. Mostly because it only lasted that long before the old headmaster of Hogwarts decided that he should simply give the rightfully angered man a blunt. The results, while potentially hazardous to anyone within the same room as them for the next several hours, led to Tom gaining access to all of Dumbledore's most prized alchemical techniques and experiences in his advanced library, completely unattended. It would have almost been funny if it wasn't for the fact that the techniques were not coded nor cursed, and in fact, were barely even locked up despite everything. The only true barrier between Tom and that knowledge was the fact that he hadn't known where to look for them. They were all hidden in the notes within smutty novels of various kinds, a few tips and tricks for alchemy that would have been missed if he didn't hear from the man himself that that was exactly how he wrote his findings down. While that was rather telling of the man's proclivities and mental state when he was a bit younger, Tom was unwilling to bet against this literally just being his own personal way to troll anyone who wished to learn his magic style. Fortunately, he was still physically too young to actually have much of a reaction. If that wasn't the case, he might have been a lot more embarrassed about the story of a calm and sweet Yuki Honor taking care of a sick man with her massive tits than he would otherwise like to admit. Say what you would about Dumbledore, but the man certainly had taste. April 1989. "Come on, Tom. Quickly now," Tonks called out to Tom as he made his way leisurely towards the Hogwarts kitchens. It was almost strange how the girls seemed to think they needed to sneak into them, despite the fact that they quite regularly had snacks delivered to them in their common room every day. Was this some strange sort of thing young girls just did at this age? Did she feel the need to hide that she wanted to eat more from the others? How was sneaking into the kitchens quietly going to solve any of this when she could just walk in normally? He had many questions, and with Bill and Charlie also tagging along, he didn't feel the need to question her, if only because they were walking straight past the entrance to the kitchens multiple times a day. Tom found it quite amusing that she hadn't noticed it yet, if he was being honest with himself. It was as if she had simply glossed over what their head of house had explained to them multiple times over the years for utterly indecipherable reasons. Well, it was pointless to linger on it. He figured the little game had gone on long enough either way. Tickling the pair on the entrance, Tom grabbed the handle that appeared and opened the door wide for the rest of them. With the air of someone who had been in the kitchens 1,000 times, he made his way over to a table inside and sat down, greeting the house elves as he did. "Hey guys, brought some friends today," he called out to them with a small smile, knowing full well what the reaction from the students would be. "Hey, what the bloody—" Charlie started, only for the group to be rapidly ushered in and fawned over by the house elves. "Yous looks very hungry. You should eat," one of the house elves claimed, offering homemade pumpkin pie for the entire group, topped with whipped cream and cinnamon. Where they got fresh pumpkin for the group in April of all things was not something that Tom was going to question, especially not when they had decided to give him a plateful of chocolate chip cookies and a glass of steamed milk to go with it for bringing them there. The dark-haired boy nodded, grateful for their consideration of giving him cookies rather than pumpkin pie after he had already had so much of it throughout the year. "Thanks. I really appreciate it." "Think nothing of it, young Master Tom," a familiar cultured voice called out from nearby. "It is my duty as your new head house elf to anticipate and assist you with your daily needs." Of course, Larry was willing to help as much as he could. Tom could only barely remember the meeting with Dumbledore that day, where the old man had sold him 3 house elves for rather cheap, but he could at least remember that Larry, Curly and Mo were all rather ecstatic about working with him in the end. Apparently working with him had become a rather prestigious position while he was staying at Hogwarts, especially with how well he managed to avoid all the random curses from the cursed vaults by sheer attention to detail and meticulous route planning. While he hadn't exactly had that great of a memory, at least before he started the process for a mind ritual that he needed to complete this year at the latest, his memory also wasn't the worst, so his ability to memorize his routes and timing to avoid danger was actually pretty spot on. It would only help when he finished the memory permanence ritual that, while misleading in name, would allow him to store his memories in his soul instead of his mind directly, allowing them to last much longer as well as allowing him to keep them even if he suffered massive permanent cranial damage. It wouldn't do to lose your memories because you were smacked with something heavy after all. The spell had the bonus side effect of making one's memories harder to tamper with and read, because they were not stored in the mind. Only those who could read souls would be able to read his mind when it was finished, and he was chomping at the bit to get the ritual finished because of this. Still, this wasn't the time and place to get lost in thought. He should eat while the food was still warm. "Why didn't you tell us that the kitchen was open to just anyone? We could have been doing this the whole time," Charlie called out from beside him, snagging a cookie for himself. Tom sighed. This was his life so far. "You never asked," he stated with another tired sigh. "Well, I never knew I could." Was this the thanks he got for being nice? Tom was certainly reconsidering doing anything for the Weasley brothers at this point. Perhaps he could simply step away from them in the future. Maybe. Summer 1989. Egypt was very sandy. Tom was beginning to hate that fact. It was coarse, rough, irritating, and it got in all of his books for some reason. Something he wasn't enthused about in the slightest. He was beginning to think that the time he spent looking around at the various tourist attractions and magical shops with his parents simply wasn't worth it as well. Because the only true difference between the books he could get in Egypt and the ones he could get in Britain was that the ones in Britain actually contained English in at least half of the book. Sure, he had managed to learn how to read Egyptian hieroglyphs in preparation for his ancient runes course, but that didn't mean he was overly fond of reading entire novels in the language, especially the ones that seemed more like badly translated Egyptian fanfics being sold as instruction manuals for various rituals and spells. At least not everything was a bust, as there was a book on how to make your own flying carpet that essentially took less effort to create than learning to ride a bike. Just grab a carpet and imbue it with a spell while soaking it in special oils, and you were pretty much golden. It didn't necessarily need to be a carpet either, or even have it soaked in the oils. In all honesty, it was just that it made the carpet stronger and less likely to tear. The oils also helped to keep it from rotting if it was stored in a wet area. In all honesty, it was just annoying that there were so many scammers and scalpers, and his parents seemed to fall for every single one of their schemes. Case in point, the guided tour of the magical pyramids, with the young local wizard guiding them through it for the equivalent of 1,000 British pounds. He was never letting his parents hold his wallet again, no matter what they claimed they were going to buy. Hell, he had only went along because they were adamant about going with or without him, and Tom did not believe that they had decided such of their own free will. He simply wouldn't let the young wizard take his parents off to be fodder for whatever this man's foul scheme was, and he was quick to contact the local equivalent of the auras to ensure that things were well in hand. They sent him in as bait with a few magical detectors and transmitters that they said should be able to see if there was any magical influence and protect him from such, but they also made sure to give him a portkey that he could use if things got rough. One specifically designed to punch a hole through magical barriers, and that could be remotely activated if he was in danger. He tried to get one for each of his parents as well, but they considered it too risky. That was utter bullshit in his opinion, but he had to listen if he wanted the help, so he did. And lo and behold, the young man led them to a hidden magical door filled with unfathomable magic power, just as he expected. "You three will make excellent food for my goddess," the young Knock guide told them, holding up a magical book of some sort to the ceiling and allowing a bright light to fill the room. When the light died down, the auras rushed in, subduing the man before he could finish whatever he was doing. Unfortunately, the book fell open, right at Tom's feet. The fluffy Nomicon, he asked himself, mildly drawn to it despite himself. Picking it up, he felt a strange warmth suffuse him, a giggle whispering through the tomb into his ears as he simply pocketed the book on reflex. He would certainly go read it later. Maybe it wasn't such a bad idea to come here after all. "No, my goddess! I only wish to summon thee," the man cried in a corner, panicking and slowly turning into a tiny fox. Well, it was what he deserved. Or at least, that was what he felt should happen to the man as punishment for messing with him. Something wasn't quite right, but he couldn't put his mind on it. What could it be? The auras began to look around the area in a mad rush to find the artifacts that had caused the cultist to do what he had, but for some reason they came up short in the end. All their spells to search for whatever may have caused such a reaction came up blank, and their magical scans of the cultist came up as him having been cursed by Thoth to become a fox for their transgressions. As a side note, Tom apparently had the blessings of both Thoth and Inari lingering on him according to their scans, something he had no clue how to feel about. So, I was blessed by the fox god and a god of furries? Tom asked in confusion as he left the pyramid with his rather shaken family. Just be thankful that any god or goddess liked you enough to provide a blessing. Please ensure that you do nothing to anger them, the aura chastised with a hint of a teasing grin. After all, if you're blessed by the fluffy ones, you will at least never be without companionship, nor will you ever go hungry. Tom thought about that for a moment and realized the man was right. Furries were normally rich after all, so he could easily see how that would relate to him making enough money to never have to worry about being able to feed himself. Maybe he should write back to the Inari Fushimi shrine and ask how to make a shrine for his home. June 1991. When Tom had decided to go to France for the summer, he really wasn't expecting to actually find the world's most renowned alchemists in the modern age. Fortunately for him, his parents dosed him with liquid luck and told him to go find himself a date with a pretty woman, which he wasn't exactly keen on doing himself. His mother might have had good intentions, but it was still annoying that she potioned his drink just to get him laid. She knew full well what his thoughts on such things were, and he was not interested in doing such things at this point in his life. However, who he met instead was a kindly older couple, who saw him fuming in a bar while he pored over Albus Dumbledore's notes on potential methods to make a philosopher's stone, and decided to talk with him. "Good evening, young man. What school project do you have that's causing you such stress?" the gentlemanly Frenchman asked, taking up a seat next to him at the bar. One glance at the paper had him laughing outright. "I see little Albus Dumbledore finally took on a student of his own, did he? I wonder what he'd think if his student managed to figure out the secret before he did." "Oh, can you give me a hint?" Tom asked with a raised eyebrow, not entirely sure where the man was going with this. "Tell you what, if you can tell me the fastest way to create a soul trap for a powerful magical creature such as a lich, then I'll consider it," the man told him with a grin. "I'll be keeping my eyes on you from now on, so do impress me, kid." After that, the man walked away with his wife in tow, and he was fairly certain he had literally just been given the answer on a silver platter. The Philosopher's Stone required the soul of a lich, or another powerful undead being, to power it. And he knew where to get one of those things. Well, he certainly wasn't going to waste his time in France trying to chase after his parents, when he could be in England dealing with his little mortality issues. How cute it was that he had all the answers he needed, and so little time before the potion ran out. Well, no time like the present to learn to operate long distances, right? Maybe it was just the potion, but he felt confident in his chances. So off he went. August 1991. So let me get this straight. You managed to figure out how to make a Philosopher's Stone, made one for each of Voldemort's soul pieces, including the one we pulled from my godson, and now you're leaving us behind to look after your financial holdings while you fling yourself through time and space. Did I catch everything? Sirius asked, standing with Tonks and Jimmy at the entrance to the ritual site in the Black Manor. Yeah, and now that all the rituals are done for my family and I, Tom rubbed his now silver goatee with a smile, his blue eyes shining with the knowledge they should not possibly have, I'm going to at least attempt to find a world that is slightly less dangerous for us to live in. "But Uncle Tom, what about us?" a young Harry Potter asked in utter despair. It was clear that between going to Hogwarts and having the man that freed his godfather around to teach him more magic himself, Harry preferred the latter. "You can come along if you want," Tom sighed, knowing that if he didn't at least offer, the kid would inevitably find some way to bring him back, or ruin his ritual and have him cursed for an eternity. "But keep in mind that I have a limited magical supply of reagents, so I can only bring so many people." Sirius looked at him and nodded. "We'll come, but what about her?" the man asked with a tilt of his head, motioning to the girl that was hiding herself at the edge of the doorframe. "Tonks?" Harry asked, looking as though he was not exactly sure what to think of the girl's distraught expression. "So you're leaving me behind?" Tonks asked with a hitch in her voice, moisture gathering in her eyes. "Well, yes," Tom noted with a sigh, brushing the hair away from his deep blue eyes. "Unlike us, you actually have a life here you want to maintain, and taking both of my parents, as well as Sirius and Harry, will be enough to run through the entirety of my prepared reagents for the multiversal transference ritual." "What if I asked you to stay?" Tonks asked, her body subtly shifting in an attempt to seem more appealing to him. Unfortunately, he just wasn't interested in her in the slightest. He had grown up in this life knowing her when he was a child, and he himself still felt like an old man inside from his last life, if one with a bit more youthful vigour to him. It just didn't feel right to see her like this, but he was simply not interested in the type of hint she seemed to be throwing his way out of the blue. Hell, it almost came entirely out of left field for him, so he had no clue what to do in this instance besides to tell her no. He wasn't exactly about to sacrifice the safety and happiness of his family for her after all. I would bluntly tell you no, and that you have goals in life and a lot to look forward to here in this world, Tom told her with a sad smile. Don't ruin what good things you have just for the off chance you think you have of finding love in a man that doesn't have the same interests as you. But I love you. I always have, the girl claimed, beginning to openly cry about it. It was unfortunate, but the silver-haired man would have no part in it. I am sorry. I truly am. But I cannot force myself to love you when all I see in you is a great friend, and one I both admire and respect for your dedication to your dreams, he said, his voice kind and soft as he gently told her that he would indeed never be able to return her affections. That does not mean there will be nothing to remember me by, the man continued, smiling softly. I will be gifting you and Jimmy each a portion of my corporate empire, as well as a few vacation homes across the globe filled with copies of all the knowledge I've collected during my time here, for your perusal. But I don't want books. I want you, she whispered softly, earning a light cough from Sirius Black. I'll get my will sorted out while I finish reinstating the Tonks into the Black family line, though I definitely won't be leaving my books behind, Sirius claimed with an awkward smile. The things within those just aren't suitable for children. I'm not a child, Tonks called out before letting out an aggrieved sigh. But if you really can't love me, what did I do wrong? Nothing, Tom told her with a cheeky grin. I just don't have a taste for women who are too young for me. That seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back, causing her to leave the room crying to herself. Unfortunately, he doubted they would be able to reconcile before he had to leave, so he was unwilling to bother chasing after her. Uncle Tom, Harry asked with a slightly wary expression, was that really necessary? It was better than leading her on and taking her from everything she knows and loves for no reason other than allowing her to suffer with us until we get set up, Tom explained with a nod. Who knows? Maybe she'll find herself a nice older man to marry and have funny shape-shifting children of her own. I just won't be the one to do it myself. Well, I hope you at least know what you're doing, Tom, Sirius sighed, allowing himself to relax into his armchair. So do I, Tom thought to himself, brushing his goatee with a hand, because at the end of the day, if he didn't, then he was well and thoroughly fucked. Day of the ritual. Yaskum. The day of the ritual was upon them. With his family gathered, both his mother and father holding on to the luggage for them, shrunk and stored within a few magical suitcases, he felt he was almost ready to go. Only Sirius and Harry, who would be arriving within a few minutes, were yet needed. Deep within the depths of one of the trunks, the three house elves, Larry, Curly and Mo, were doing their best to organise and store all of the many things that were being kept within. They, along with many other creatures and plants, would be coming with them to whatever worlds they explored, allowing Tom to have access to plenty of help and magical reagents should he so choose. There was a knock on the door behind them, and the door to the coffee shop-like interior of the ritual chambers opened, revealing the solemn faces of the last two people he needed. As they closed the door, magically locking it behind them, Harry nodded and began the ritual. With magical fire to roast the holy beans of life, powered by the souls of the truly evil, I begin this ritual in dedication to the fluffiest of all, Tom began, standing entirely naked in front of a specialized kiln. He was focused, filled with enough caffeinated beverages to give him heart palpitations, and beginning to sweat already from using a philosopher's stone to fuel the ritual. As the beans cooked, he watched them carefully. It was a very special process that needed the utmost attention, one that he could not spare even a moment to look away from. Once the magic had soaked in and the beans were roasted to perfection, he pulled them out with wandless magic and put them in the magical grinder. By the might of my magic, I crushed the beans against the rocks from the tallest peak in the true north of the world. According to the ritual, the more effort he went to gathering these things, the more likely he would be to summon the elder goddess, so he had actually climbed a mountain in Canada with full intent to mine the stone there for grinding coffee with. The locals looked at him as if he was crazy, but they were the ones smoking pot every day and enjoying their fentanyl in the not-so-far-off future, so he didn't truly care. Finishing once they were finely ground, he used his wand to adjust his magic so he could gently lift each individual grain and put them into the French press like a stream of flowing sand. As soon as it was all within the coffee press, Tom smiled, holding a bottle of a very specific type of water. and with the water collected from the purified sap of 1,000 maple trees, boiled in magical flame, I brew you, Aiko Akiyoshi, a delicious mug of coffee. He did exactly as described in the book, and poured it into the prepared mug on a magic circle inscribed coaster, adding normal cream and sugar to the exact specifications. And then he felt it, the exhilarating feeling of being accepted by the goddess. Ah, you really didn't need to go through that much trouble, a golden blonde kitsune of 9 tails claimed with a sigh, taking the coffee from him as she booped his nose. Next time, just go to a Tim Hortons and buy me a coffee there. Just a normal double-double. Wait, what? Also, what the fuck kind of cursed book is this? The kitsune puffed her tails up, shivering in disgust at a page somewhere within the ritual book that she didn't like. I sure as hell hope you didn't try any of the other rituals in this, or I'm going to have to give my daughter a spanking. Sirius and Harry looked upon her in awe, her body glowing as she slid the book between her massive tits and let it disappear with a sigh. The constant pressure to summon her from the back of his soul seemed to dissipate instantly, and he was left with the realization that he had indeed been cursed by that book for years, and hadn't even realized. Taking a sip of her coffee, she looked over them a bit more closely. I can only help so much, by the way. If you have wishes you wish me to grant, like being sent to a random world within me, you'll have to complete a few tasks within there before you can actually summon me again. Otherwise, I'll accept the coffee through you, but I won't exactly answer your call until you have already passed on. Did she just imply what he thought she did? That's not to say you should kill yourself to see me earlier. Nope, that would piss me off, so I'd make you wait for 1,000 extra years per second of your life you would have had left normally, and you'll just be an angry ghost with no way to affect the real world around you, despite being cursed to wander around the space you died until I pick you up. Apparently not. At least he hadn't accidentally joined a death cult, so that was a silver lining at least. Flicking her ears in his direction, she continued her introductions and information dump. By the way, all prayers to Inari will also reach me, as Inari and I have a sort of mutual agreement to help each other out since she is the goddess of foxes, and despite all my power I am still a fox. Oh, Tom realized. He had made many wishes about being gifted good fortune and being sent to a world that was safer than this one, and had easier methods to travel between universes. I apologize? Why, though? Aiko asked with a tilt of her head, as if she wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. I was only waiting for you because you didn't believe you could summon me, and because I needed you to save Harry and Sirius before I could take you away from here. So you knew I would accomplish this? He asked, his eyes wide as he thought of the implications. Hell no. I may be omnipotent, but I'm not omniscient. I can only watch so much for so long before my fluffy brain gets distracted by my own tales. Aiko chuckled, finishing her coffee with a grin. Looking at all of them once more, she smiled. Okay, so I'll grant the wishes within your hearts, Aiko told them with a slightly silly expression. Not that he was going to tell her it was silly to her face. For Harry Potter, I grant access to and from the room of requirement to the 3 of you from any locked door, allowing you to return here at will, she claimed with a smile. For Sirius Black, I grant luck in all things love to the party, she told them with a wink. You will all find love someday, so long as you wait patiently. For Ashley and Jerry Harrison, I grant your son the name Thomas Richard Harrison, so that he will no longer need to have his name ridiculed amongst those in the know unless he allows it, Aiko told them with a smile, nodding her head at them in respect. And finally for Thomas, I grant safe passage for all of you into my inner worlds, that you may one day find the world you wish to settle on for good. With that, her tails grabbed the party, swallowing them up along with their stuff, and depositing them within the world she had planned out for their first stop. The stage was set, and the story would continue in the next act of Home Sweet Home.